Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to call the meeting to order, 7:04 p.m. Good evening, everybody. All my colleagues are present. We have just adjourned from an executive session involving litigation from a claim before the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination by a Police Officer in accordance with Mass General Law, and also for the approval of executive session minutes from November 12th, November 25th, and December 16th of 2019. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Thank you all for being here. Happy New Year to everybody. Welcome back to my colleagues and to the manager. We have 8 Treasury warrants to approve, 25, 25A, 26, 26A, 27, 27A, 28, and 28A. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and second. All in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. We have 2 sets of minutes to approve from December 10th of 2018 and November 25th of 2019. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion's made. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Mr. Chair, I would just be abstaining from the December 10th, 2018 vote since I was...
Thank you. Mr. McCoy, without objection, we'll take them up separately for November 18th?
Sure.
Thank you. All those in favor of the December 10th, 2018, signify by saying aye. Aye. 4, and 1 abstain. Passes. And is there a motion for November 25th, 2019?
So moved.
Motion's made. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, and now the moment you've all been waiting for. The reason we're all here. This is exciting. We are here this evening to recognize the Papuana D team, cheerleaders and coaches on winning the national championship. Most teams that win the national championship end up going to the White House. This is one step above that. I want to welcome them on up. If the players and coaches would come forward. Let's hear it for them as they come in. Yeah, come on up. This is great. We're going to do a couple remarks, then we'll take the picture, all right, boss? Okay. All right. Before you, we have 29 of the finest athletes that Wilmington has to offer. We are incredibly proud of this group, and in a moment, we'll get to meet all of them. I know some of the coaches, assistant coaches, and the coach is on her way, and she'll be with us very shortly. But I also want to recognize the Papuana president, Joe McCauley's here. I want to thank you for your efforts. And I'll let the coaches explain. I won't pretend to know what happened. But I do know that over the course of the last couple months, you guys have worked extremely hard. I know I saw you back in October at homecoming. And man, I knew then you guys were going to be destined for something special. And so you surely proved me right. You've made this town incredibly proud of you. And we want to honor you all here tonight. I know that you've competed here regionally. And then for those of you who don't know, went on to compete at Disney World in Florida. And obviously brought home the national championship to make us all very proud, put Wilmington on the map. So the girls range from ages grade 3 to 6. And so some of our best elementary students, you competed against teams from Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Florida. And so one thing we do need to talk about is that you missed a couple days of school. And so, good news, I'm here to officially pardon you all for missing school. Can I do that? Okay, I tried. But I'll talk to Dr. Brand after to see what we can do. But we're really proud of you, your coaches. And how about your parents? Your parents, we got to give them a nice big round of applause. We know that they drove you to practice every day. I hope they did. I hope you didn't drive. And they took you to the games, some far away, and then they took you to the competitions, and some of them traveled all the way to Florida. So we really appreciate all the parents' support as well. So without further ado, I know Deb's not here, but I'll give her the microphone when she does get here. Is she here? She's on her way. Okay. But while we're waiting, we're going to introduce the girls. I'm going to step around the front. I got some certificates from the town. Can you guys hear me? You guys can.
Yeah.
You guys nervous? You're not nervous. You won the national championship. This is nothing. All right. I got this nice certificate for you. We'll call your name, you come on up and you'll get it, and then we'll take a big group picture. It's a school night, so we gotta get out of here. Okay? And so, we'll call you up individually. The certificate says from the town of Wilmington, in recognition of your exceptional performance as a member of the Wilmington Pop Warner D team, the National Cheerleading Champions 2019. Presented on this day, the 13th day of January, signed by myself on behalf of my colleagues in the Board of Selectmen, and signed by our town manager, Jeff Hull. He's that guy in the back. All right, here we go. I'll do my best to announce the names. We have, who put these in cursive? Aubrey, where's Aubrey? Come on up, Aubrey. Here you are. How about Aubrey? Ella, where's Ella? Kayla. Kayla. Sophia. Isabella. Watch this. Omelet? Omelet. Where's omelet? Megan. Teresa. Zoe. Gianna. Half the team is named Lillian or Lily, so. Lillian King. Maya. Isabella. Is Leah here? Leah? She's not. Okay, we'll get it to her. Grace. Lily McLaughlin. Lila. Taylor is not here as well? Okay. Ashley? Avery? Ava? Jalen? Haley? Kayla? Olivia? miss anybody? Oh, you. How could I forget Lily, the flower girl in my wedding? Lily in French, everybody. And your birthday was yesterday. Happy birthday. We had an unbelievable coaching staff and people who helped out. Michaela Russell. Caitlin Gillespie. Victoria Champer. Michaela O'Brien. Katie Lange. And then we had our other coaches, my good friend and a terrific high school coach and Puckwater coach, and Nicole Miguel. My maid of honor. Andrea's, but you get what I'm saying. And then, last but not least, and she needs no introduction to anybody. She's the reason we're all here, literally. You're not going to find a better human being in this community. Terrific leader. She is a phenomenal coach, somebody who's coached, somebody I really idolize. She really knows how to motivate young women, even to today. My wife, if Deb says jump, Andrea says how high. She has quite the following, as you all know, but I can't think of anybody who I've benefited from, this group of young women has benefited from, than this next woman. She's done just outstanding work for the Puckwater program for generations in this town. And I'm proud to call her my friend. And without further ado, the coach is Deb Smith.
How young these girls are, and they are it was a little tight for me. So you can see how young they are. They're a level 3 competing cheerleading team, which generally would be at a high school age level. Their skill level is singling out of stunts, which a lot of people won't understand, but cheerleading people will. Their tumbling is round off back handspring tucks, series back handsprings, back walkovers, things like that. That generally doesn't happen at this young age level, and that comes from the dedication of all of these athletes and all of their parents. So they actually, are the ones who really should get the applause. I kind of lead them and they just do it. So we owe all of them and our amazing program. Most Puckwater programs are really struggling, today. There's a lot of concern with football and things, and most Puckwater programs are struggling, and we have a great president, which is Joe McCauley, who's hiding back over the really tall guy trying to hide, and a fantastic board of directors that are here. And these kids work really hard. They practice 4 days a week in August. They're not allowed to really go on vacation. They practice Monday through Thursday from 6 to 8, and then they practice 3 nights a week during the school year, and they compete at least 4 times as long as they make it to nationals. We're very fortunate in Wilmington. This is our 9th national championship, and I'm sure that these kids are really going to try to get us to that 10th. It's a great program, and I'm really proud of everything that they've done, so they deserve this. Thank you.
Congratulatory remarks. Real quick, we'll go down the line. If you just want to turn around, they got some nice things they want to say about you. And Kyra.
Congratulations, girls. This town is so proud of you, what you've accomplished. We can't wait to see what's going to happen next year. Congratulations to the coaches, to the parents, thank you so much. You've raised beautiful kids here. Just a lot of pride in Wilmington, and we're can't say enough how nice it is to have you here and to honor you for being national champs. It's outstanding. Congratulations.
I'll just say quickly, obviously, the cheerleaders are the finest in the land here, as we all can see. And I just want to wish you young ladies all the best that you can do. Enjoy life. You guys are amazing. When I'm hearing the coach saying that you're up early and you have to be at this practice, that practice, it's a major task. And don't forget, love your parents, because your parents are with you through life. Thank you.
Usually the audience is a little bit further away from me, so I'll try and speak to you. Yeah, I'll speak up. So I want to congratulate all of you. I'll echo some of my colleagues as well, but I do want to say that we all are very proud of you, and I do think the comments about your parents as well are very well founded. So I'm sure they dedicate a lot of time driving you folks back and forth to practice, and going down to Disneyland for nationals must have been a real struggle to go down to Disney. But I want to congratulate you folks, and we hope to see you guys back here when you repeat as national champions. So good job.
Ladies, I just want you all to know that we appreciate that you're the champions given by someone else telling you that you're the champions, but every day I want you to tell yourself you're champions for all kinds of reasons, not just because of the uniform you're putting on and the work that you're doing with your team, but you're awesome in every way possible. And I would love, Mr. Chair, do we have the ability to have them do some type of like spirit cheer for us, just yeah, do you guys have some? I don't want you to tumble and stuff because we don't have any mats down. But I'd love to see some of your stuff. I feel like you got to motivate us to get through the rest of this meeting.
Give me a C.
Nice. Sorry, ladies.
proud of you guys. You guys are an inspiration to younger girls in our community, like my daughters. They really, literally look up to you. We're so, so proud of all your hard work. Keep working hard. Keep doing great in school. And we want you back here next year. And we want the full routine. We'll clear out all right? Before they go. Absolutely. You got an announcement? Before they go, I'd like them all to turn this way towards me. Oh, okay. Smush together. welcome to stay. Thank you. All right, we'll just give a moment for the room to clear out. That was fun. Okay. We'll move into our next appointment. Tough act to follow, so good luck. But we want to welcome Andrew Shaben, Chief Executive Officer of Princeton Properties, regarding a proposal for affordable housing on Jefferson Road. Mr. Shaben, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for this coveted slot, trying to follow something so joyous with a housing proposal. But we will endeavor on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing us to be here. Members of the board, Mr. Manager, employees from the town, and invited guests. It's a pleasure to be here and to continue the conversation about the proposal that we've made off of Middlesex on Jefferson for 108 apartment homes to be constructed. I want to introduce my colleagues, my development partner, Dan Endyke, Eric Swanson from the firm of Hancock Associates, and also in the audience is Christian Jensen, who represents the family who we are contracted to purchase the land from. Just to recap, when we met with the Board of Selectmen several meetings ago, we proposed no specific agenda other than that we would like to create a community of rental housing here. We talked about, if you will, the borders of the piece of land, but we came to the community sort of with an open slate, a blank slate, and asked for some opportunity to collaborate with the town manager, with the director of planning and conservation, and with the town engineer. This board allowed us to do that. We've had several meetings in the interim with those folks, and what we've brought to you today is certainly by no means a absolute finished product, but what we believe is the product of some work and some collaboration, and we believe the correct proposal for the town to move forward with. Just to recap, Princeton Properties has been a developer and owner of apartment rental homes in the Merrimack Valley since 1973. We are long-term holders of our product. We still have the very first 24 apartment home building that we have across from Lowell General Hospital on Varnum Avenue. And you can see up here on the screen are those communities in which we currently hold apartment homes. We proudly can tell you that we own and or manage in excess of 7,400 apartment homes today.
Mr. Shaben, if I could just
Sure.
interrupt you, I want to let the audience know that we have made this available. I believe it's in the back of the room if anybody would like to follow along. We have copies of the presentation. Thank you.
There in the back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I said, we now have about 7,400 apartment units, started in 1973, and we are strictly a one-trick pony, if you will. We own and manage apartment buildings. We really don't have any other interests. We've been doing the same thing for those many years. Dan and I have been development partners for going over 26 years now, so we start to complete each other's sentences at this point. The proposal that we have in front of you is for 2 buildings, for 108 apartment homes. 50% of those apartment homes are for 1-bedrooms, 40% for 2 bedrooms, and as state law requires, 10% for 3-bedroom apartment homes. The units range in size from 850 square feet to a high of 1,350 square feet. We have removed the underground parking to lower the height of the building in response to concerns that were brought to us not only by this board, but by the engineering staff and the planning and conservation staff. And what we have done is we have moved the garages out. We have 36 attached garages, and when we get to the site plan, we'll show that to you. But what we've done is kept the parking, the number of parking spaces there. We have about a 1.7 to 1 ratio for parking, which we feel is more than enough, especially as we are adjacent to the North Wilmington train. And we feel pretty comfortable that we've come up with a height that responds to the concerns that this board gave us the first time we sort of rolled out our idea. The key to unlocking the value of this site is an intended application to the MassWorks program of the Commonwealth. This site currently does not have town sewer to it. It will be our responsibility if this board and then ultimately the zoning board and the Conservation Commission see fit to move us forward. It will be our responsibility to see that funds are secured from the Commonwealth to be able to bring the sewer from its current location to the site. It will unlock various other parcels, some of which that are owned by the town of Wilmington, that will allow for those properties to be developed in a manner that the manager and his colleagues might see fit to bring forward to the various boards, but will allow them to develop them in a more responsible way, and will create sewerage opportunities for roughly half a mile that currently is not there. I think it's important to note that this site is part of the town's master plan for sewer, so this property is supposed to be sewered, if you will, down the road. The funds would be our responsibility to bring those forward from the Commonwealth. Yep. The other, back one, Dan. The other thing to point out, in response to the town's engineering department, one of the other items that are important is that there is a failing culvert that this project would purport to try and pay for. It is something that is important to the town engineer who's here this evening, and if that is important, I'm sure it can come up, but it is our intention to do our best to re-engineer and ultimately pay for the lion's share, if not 100%, of the ability to rebuild and replace that culvert if possible. The anticipated grant would be a roughly $2 million ask of the Commonwealth for the sewer, for the culvert, and potentially some other items as they come up. The timeline of the project is important. This is an approximate timeline, but one that I think is important to this board. We are here this evening to ask the Select Board for what is called a local initiative petition demonstration. The local initiative petition means that the petition for our housing would be a joint petition between this Board of Selectmen and Princeton Development to be able to move to the Town Zoning Board of Appeals and to the Conservation Commission as a joint applicant with the town to be able to move forward critically needed housing on a parcel in a responsible manner. The Select Board's designation of a local initiative petition signifies their intention to want to see this site developed for rental housing, but in no way, shape, or form does it bind the Zoning Board of Appeals or the Conservation Commission. They have jobs to do with respect to zoning and parking and side yards and setbacks, and those things fall in the jurisdiction of the Zoning Board, and the Conservation Commission has similar jurisdictions with respect to water quality, et cetera. So what we'll be asking of the Select Board this evening is for a designation that they believe that this site is appropriate for rental housing, but in no way, shape, or form does it usurp the power of the Zoning Board of Appeals or the Conservation Commission. The timeline is laid out here. Our intention will be to submit, if we're successful this evening in asking the Select Board for its approval. We'll be following the timeline here, asking the Zoning Board and the Conservation Commission to work between roughly the middle of February to the middle to end of July to try and move our process forward. We intend to submit roughly on July 15th, if we're fortunate enough to move through the process, submit our grant application for MassWorks to the Commonwealth, who will view that application over a 30 to 60-day period of time, and then roughly the 1st of November 2020, hopefully award the town of Wilmington, not the developer, but award the town of Wilmington the monies to be able to bring the sewer forward. We will oversee that process. We will pay for the application. We will pay for the soft costs to be able to outline the MassWorks application, but the grant of MassWorks goes from the Commonwealth to the town and would be administered by the town in cooperation with us. Our intention would be construction of this property, if we're fortunate enough to move through the process, in April of 2021. We have worked with the manager's office and have put together what we hope to be a vote should the chair move it forward and ask for a motion in a second. We have outlined a sample local initiative petition vote, and that vote is in front of the selectmen and is part of the packages that we've left at the back as well. The site plan is fairly simplistic at the moment. We have Middlesex here. We have Jefferson here. So again, Middlesex, Jefferson. And we are proposing two buildings. One here in the form of an L, set back from the street fairly considerably, and one here more in the shape almost of a half of a U in the back here. So these two buildings combined total 108 apartment homes. As I said, 50% of those as one bedrooms, 40% as twos, 10% as threes. The site currently is under no water quality. Everything sort of that sits there sort of runs, if you will, into the wetlands that are there. I think it's easy and fair to say that with our apartment community there, as opposed to nothing there, the water quality should improve fairly significantly. I know that's a real issue and has been a real issue for the town of Wilmington in the past, and our site will have full stormwater controls that will trap everything and treat it prior to the time it's released back into any of the wetlands. So I think it's important for us to point out that with us there and with full water quality treatment, we'll be better off in 2021 than the site will be in 2020. We have a rendering. We actually have two views of the two different buildings that we have there. We have brought the building down in height fairly significantly. One of the concerns that was brought to us is just sort of the massing and the scale. And so what we've done is we've relocated more of the one-bedrooms in toward the front building so that we were able to bring that building down a full story from our original presentation. And so now you will see 4 stories of living, but no garage parking on the first floor, so we've been able to bring this down a whole level. The building will look like it has a pitched roof from the front. What you'll see basically is that's a false front, which we do in many of our buildings today. All of the HVAC or condensing equipment will end up on the roof, so we don't take up valuable space on the ground. So you'll see what will appear from the ground to be a pitched roof, a more colonial look to it, but the building will basically have a flat roof to it. Probably a better, easier angle here. And what we've done is remove the garage, as I said, and we've put in these bays of detached, they're attached individually but not attached to the building, in rows of 6 and 8 throughout the site for 36 garage spaces to go with the surface parking. As I said, a total of about 1.7 for every apartment home that's there. These are just for the board's edification, but these are basically the layout of the individual floors. Mr. Chairman, that's our first thought. We want to make sure we leave enough time for questions of the board or questions of your town staff. I want to close by thanking you for the time to make the presentation this evening and to let you know that we work in quite a few communities, and we're pleased at the diligence. Your staff has been responsive and respectful. Jeff, Valerie, the town engineer, everybody that we've come in contact with has really given us every opportunity to put the best proposal forward, so we thank them for that. That's our proposal, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate the presentation. Just for some background purposes, you first came to us over the summer. I think approached the manager, and we had you in to hear, and I saw it fit at that time to bring it forward to the entire board. I believe it was in September, perhaps the end of September. when we first, and since that time, we've had some back and forth. I'm pleased to say from the town's perspective, we've been able to negotiate the size of the project down from 120 units down to 108. We were able to negotiate down the size of the actual building. We were able to negotiate the distance from the street. I think we're looking at proposed 75 feet back, which is far different than some of the projects we have in town, like the Metro at the 62 Bridge is much closer. We were able to negotiate that some of the businesses will remain. That back building, I don't know if you mentioned this or not, but that back building and businesses will remain, which was a concern of this board as we move forward. And also very pleased that we had discussions, and you've come to an agreement that you will, a to-be-determined amount, but we'll be able to negotiate some funding for a future fire station in North Wilmington, which you've agreed to. So
Yes, we have, Mr. Chairman.
we look forward to, we certainly haven't come to an agreement on any numbers or anything, that's just initial agreement that will be the case if this project moves forward. From the presentations I've seen from your group, we will be doing a traffic study, but it doesn't appear as if we'll need a traffic light there, which is...
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. It is, I think, fairly well known how difficult it is to get a warrant for a traffic light, and we will certainly be providing the Zoning Board of Appeals with the traffic study by Vanessa and Associates, but I think it's been fairly well held that a traffic light will not be needed for this project.
And then I have an opportunity, I hope my colleagues have too, to view some of your recent projects in Chelmsford, North Andover, and Westford. Obviously, I think your work speaks for itself. We could put some positive recommendations from folks over there. I see this as a positive opportunity to bring sewer to that part of the community, if that is the case, if the state grants us that. And we are certainly in a position, and the town planner can speak to it better than I, but we are in a situation where we are in dire need of affordable units immediately. And if we don't, we will fall below the 10% threshold, and there is the potential for much, much larger developments in places like this. I should mention that going back a year ago, I want to compliment my colleague, Mr. Kyra, who was chair at the time, was approached by a different developer for the prospect of putting 350-plus units, correct me if I'm wrong, it was somewhere in the order of 350-plus units at this site. He didn't even entertain it to bring it to the board, and I think that was appropriate at the time. Here we find ourselves with a much smaller, sizable project. No project is perfect, with all due respect. I think you can agree. But we are in a position where we can now finally get some affordable units in the community to put us over the 10% threshold, which would prevent a much larger development that we would have no control over going forward. So I know my colleagues have some comments and perhaps some questions, so I want to open up to them. And I also want to welcome the town planner and the manager to chime in as well if you see fit. Mr. Eaton?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chapin, for being here. I do want to acknowledge that this has been a very open dialogue, and I'm glad to see us have the next step of this discussion. I did want to ask a few questions of you, Ms. Gingrich, our planning director. Just by way of, I guess, laying the foundation, so part of the 10% that the chair mentioned was a state requirement that if our housing inventory falls below 10% at each 10-year census, then the town would be susceptible to a 40B development, which would not be restricted by our local zoning laws, and that the reason why a suburban community where the overwhelming number of residences are single-family units would entertain a 40B instead of being essentially by force of state law would be to first improve or increase the affordable housing inventory that we have and also to meet that 10% threshold. So I wanted to ask you as to where you thought we were currently on our affordable housing inventory.
Thank you. Valerie Gingrich, I'm the Director of Planning and Conservation. We have been sent a list of our affordable housing units from DHCD, and we were asked to review that list and give them any feedback by the 17th of the month. And on that list, it appears that some of our group home units were taken off of that list, which group homes count towards our affordable count, but we don't have any control over. We don't actually know where they are, so they're sort of this unknown number that the state gets from the other state agency. So as of this point, it looks like we will be below the 10% sooner rather than later.
Do you have a rough estimate as to how far below we would be?
I think it's about 3 units.
3 units, okay. And of the 108 units that would be a part of this proposal, would all of them count towards our affordable housing inventory?
They would, because it's a rental project, so as long as you have the required 20 or 25%, all of the units count towards your affordable count for a rental project.
Okay, so my next question is one more of timing, and this might be more appropriate to town council I see here, but I know that I received my own census in the mail this past week. Is this too little too late?
No, so, well, when the census numbers come out, the percentage will get worse for us, right? But as I project it, I believe 108 units would still get us above the 10%, even with the new census data. The building department tracks the number of housing units in town as they're constructed, so we use that data to project how many housing units total in town, which will be the change for our percentage. So we're projected to, with an addition of 108 units, we would be, we'd still be above that 10% with my projections.
Okay, let me, I don't think I was as clear as I could have been. At what point is the state measuring us as to that 10% threshold? Has that date come and gone because it's now January 13th, 2020? Or is that something that we could use these 108 units to get above and beyond?
So the state does their numbers every other year. That document that was just sent was this year's count. So unless, I don't think there are any errors on that. So as of the 17th, we would be confirming that the list is correct and we would be under the 10%. When the census data comes out, which won't be right away after the census, I'm told it'll be sometime in 2021 or 2022. That's when the new percentage is calculated. So that's sort of in the future. This project, the units would count, it would start counting, and correct me if I'm wrong, start counting when the Board of Appeals approves the permit. They would count towards our unit count. But then they would have 12 months to pull a building permit to still count. And then they would have 18 months to get occupancy to stay on the count. So there's sort of a timeline that they have to meet that timeline to keep counting.
Okay. My next questions is probably more to Attorney Silverstein. The development agreement that was in the town manager's memorandum to us, and I see to you as well. How often are those types of agreements entered into between a community and a developer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Jonathan Silverstein, Town Council. Just before I answer your question, just following up on Ms. Gingrich's answer about the timing, the denominator of the number of total housing units in the town, year-round housing units in the town, that's what gets updated on a decennial basis. The numerator, the number of affordable units that you use to calculate whether you have 10%, that gets updated on an ongoing rolling basis. Mm-hmm. So to your question, as soon as a comprehensive permit issues or a building permit issues for some other type of local action unit or affordable unit, you get the credit. So just to make sure that you understand that. In terms of the development agreement, a lot of people, when they hear Chapter 40B, they think of what most folks think of as hostile 40B developers or developments. LIP, or Local Action Program developments, are known usually as friendly 40Bs. It's an agreement between a town, the Board of Selectmen or the mayor in a city, and the developer, where you have a lot more control, particularly in a town that, at least currently, the state's subsidized housing inventory has you above 10%, so you have a lot more leverage right now to control how a development will look, so that instead of 300 plus units, you're getting 108 units. My recommendation anytime a town is looking at a LIP project is to enter into a development agreement. Not in any way, I've worked in, my office has worked with Princeton Properties many times, they're a great developer, not because we don't trust the developer, but just because it sort of sets forth, makes sure everyone's on the same page in terms of what the commitments are going to be, what the town's agreeing to, what the developer's committing to. So the short answer to your question is, I recommend a development agreement for any sort of LIP project.
Is that agreement kind of independent of the Board of Appeals process, or is that something that goes hand in hand?
It's absolutely independent, as Mr. Chapin indicated. What this board's role is basically to sign the LIP, or to vote to approve and to sign the LIP application that goes to the state's Department of Housing and Community Development. Basically, that's the chief executive body saying we're supportive of this project. But that's subject to the jurisdiction of the Zoning Board of Appeals, which has to issue what's called a comprehensive permit under Chapter 40B. So whatever this board does not bind the Zoning Board of Appeals. Conceivably, you could have a situation where the Board of Selectmen has a contract with a developer that says you have to do X, and the Zoning Board of Appeals in its comprehensive permit says, no, we don't want you to do X, we want you to do Y. I've seen that happen on a handful of occasions, but it's not common. And usually then the developer comes back to the Board of Selectmen and says, ZBA wants us to do Y, can we amend the development agreement? And that it usually gets worked out.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question, Mr. Chair, and this is to Mr. Chapin. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, we have an apartment complex in North Wilmington called Avalon Oaks, and it was kind of a perfect storm type of situation. It was a blizzard going on, and there was a fire that I believe was started by a propane grill that was on someone's balcony, and it very quickly turned into a very consuming fire for the entire building. Certainly not an expert on fire, but I do remember speaking to the police chief who described, or the fire chief who described it as that building was more or less built to burn. And I remember that phrase really sticking out because some of the attic space, if you will, was all just open above several apartment buildings. And what that happened is as soon as the fire hit there, it spread laterally across the entire building, and the entire building was very quickly consumed. What kind of, I guess, preventative measures would you be taking to make sure that something like that would not happen in the development that you're proposing?
Two things, Mr. Eaton. First of all, when Avalon Oaks was constructed, if I don't miss my guess, they used a code that allowed what was called 13R, which basically allowed for sprinklers to be placed in the apartment homes, but likely did not include the attic or some other common spaces. Code has been moved for multifamily housing of this type to require 13 as opposed to 13R, which is a more generalized and basically more comprehensive firefighting technique and allows for really more sprinkler heads, including the attic. And so that's the principal issue, and that is what we will be using. That's what our insurance company will require of us anyway. So that gets to that point. With respect to a charcoal grill, no one in a multifamily structure, a wood frame structure, should have open flame on a deck. Our leases require that. The standard rental housing association lease I know the folks at Avalon, they are top-notch developers and top-notch managers, and I would bet that whoever did that was in violation of their lease to begin with. So our leases say that, and our on-site property management staff will enforce that.
Thank you.
Mrs. O'Mahony.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chapin, welcome back.
Thank you.
I want to first thank you for the 108 units. I know when you reduce, every unit you reduce, you're reducing your profit. And I'm pleased that we got to that point where I think it's more palatable for everybody for that area. So my main question, and I know you said there was a representative of the current owners here, so it might not be you, it might be them that would be answering this. I know as part of the discussion when you came initially, we talked about the MBTA platform kind of being in that area as well, and what efforts could be made as we're developing this area to improve that situation. Has that been part of your discussions? Is there anything more definitive that we can learn from that or about that?
Absolutely. Great question. What we have done, and Christian Jensen is here this evening, and I'll certainly ask him to stand up and make a commitment on behalf of the land seller. But in essence, because the design is not complete, we have not been able to ascertain exactly what will be best for the town, what will be best for the developer, and what will be best for the MBTA with respect to altering their platform, if at all. So our intention and our commitment to the manager was this, and Christian will make that clear this evening as well. If there is several feet, and we're talking about feet, we're not even talking about yards, feet of being able to donate land or be able to trade land to be able to make things safer there, or if there are improvements that need to be done. As we move through the process, our pledge to you, and I will ask Christian to make the same pledge, is that we will work in concert for the best public safety and the best opportunity we can to maximize what we have there. Christian, maybe you want to come to the microphone and hopefully reiterate what I said.
Exactly what he said, actually. We've looked at it, and there might be something like 3 or so feet where there's sort of a boundary that we can't account for in terms of ownership, and we would, if we have to, work with the town to accommodate the MBTA to make the necessary improvements there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Mr. McCoy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could, Mr. Chairman, I just want to ask the applicant a couple of questions, and if I can do a follow-up with some questions and maybe some commentary later. But relative to the presentation here, you said you're looking to construct 2 buildings 4 stories high.
Correct.
You didn't exactly say how tall those 4 stories, from the ground to the pitch roof. What is the height of those buildings, please?
Great question. Assuming it's a flat roof and will not be going to the median pitch, as you will, as we normally would if it were a pitched roof, the answer is will be no taller than 50 feet. If for whatever reason the Zoning Board of Appeals would like us to put a pitched roof on it and it's done to the median, then it would be 55 feet. So we pledged 4 stories. I think it really depends on what, if anything, the zoning board may touch with respect to the architect's plans with respect to the roof. So no higher than 55 and likely no higher than 50.
I understand what you're doing. You're coming in for a special permit. I know we have, bylaws on the book zoning, and obviously that kind of circumvents that. But, we're trying to just work, in a partnership from what I'm gathering here.
Yes.
But in your researches, where is the closest area where you want to build this is the closest 4-story building? I don't know if there's any 4-story buildings in that area, but where would be the closest 4-story building?
Well, I can tell you that the buildings that the chair referenced in North Andover, in Westford, and those buildings are all 4-story.
I'm talking about here in the town of
In
Wilmington.
Wilmington, the only one is the Metro 3 or 4-story as it steps back from the street.
Avalon's 3.5.
Yeah. And the reason I hesitated is I know that there's more than 3, but I'm not sure it's it's probably what's called a 3-4, meaning half of it is 3 and the other half is 4. It's dug into the hill and it uses the grade there. So in essence, that's a 4-story building at the
It'd be
Metro.
interesting to find out if we could down the road, or tonight, where's the closest 4-story? But living in the town a long time, I would think the closest 4-story is basically off Ballardville Street. There's 4-story buildings out in that area. So I don't see any 4-story buildings in that whole geographic area. As a matter of fact, in the town, at the town center, we're talking 3.5 stories of Metro. You know, so I'm just trying to look to see where that area was. And if the Mass Works grant is not available, and I know everything's contingent upon the sewer, what are you gonna do as a developer if if the board is looking to sign this agreement? I don't know if the town's gonna be on the hook. I'd be interested in finding out from Jeff if we'd be on the hook for any of this money. But if you don't get the grant, is the project dead, or are you gonna come up with $2.5 million?
No, certainly we would not, the project for 108 units would certainly not support the project's paying for that. It's just completely contingent upon going for the MassWorks grant. I can tell you, having worked with the MassWorks program, our latest one was the one in North Andover, which we did, which was about $2.7 million of MassWorks. We would not be spending the soft cost money if we didn't feel comfortable for this. The town of Wilmington is certainly in line for, and should be in line for a MassWorks grant. To the best of our knowledge, going back to the beginning of the MassWorks program, the town has not utilized the MassWorks program. And so we think that, that Wilmington certainly has a case to be made, and we're going to make that case together with the town if we're fortunate enough this evening to move it forward. But the direct answer to your question is that if for some reason the MassWorks grant were not allocated and there was no sewer there, we would not be developing the apartment community.
All right. And I noticed, you said it's 108 units, and I mean, unfortunately, we've been looking at a fire substation for years, and I think it's time the town gets its act together and actually constructs a fire substation in North Wilmington a lot sooner than later. And the only point I'm making is that we're looking at 108 units, and obviously it's in North Wilmington. I don't know how much money you'd be contributing to a substation, but the point I'm making is that with the development, it seems like North Wilmington's going to be widespread for development. I can see that happening. I think folks out there know that's going to happen. And here we are, we had the fire chief and the police chief not too long ago telling us that it takes too much time to get to North Wilmington, but yet we're going to be putting this cluster development right in the area where it's going to take a lot of time. That's a concern of mine, obviously, and I think it's rightfully so. And obviously, when I talk about the 4 stories of the building, obviously you're trying to look for something that's, say, harmonious to the neighborhood. And I understand there's a little give and take there, but I do show a little concern that, it's going to be a 4-story structure. You're looking at 50, 55 feet, and it's going to be, you're going to see it. It's going to be somewhat monstrous in that area. Is there any way of you scaling back a little bit instead of going 4 stories? Could you make it 2 stories, or maybe work something out with the Eli family? I don't know.
At this point, the answer to that, Mr. McCoy, is no. We have already brought the height of the development down from its original intent. As I think the chair pointed out, there were proposals floated here for north of 300 units on a site like this. We have done our best to respect the wetlands. We have not tried to access by crossing wetlands upland parcels that would be even more challenging for both the police and the fire department, as well as for the Conservation Commission. I think many of those proposals that were brought forward, in my humble opinion, were simply too much. I think this is exactly the right proposal, and the reason I say that is we've respected the resource areas. We've put in what's necessary to make an economic development, but we've tried to find that correct piece of harmony. I think that the development would have supported, or the land would have supported 120. As your colleague pointed out, we did move down to 108. We did move more of the 1-bedrooms to the front building to try and bring that scale and that height down. I think we've sort of reached, if you will, the minimum that can be done to make an economically viable project on that land.
And this is going to be a rental property, obviously,
100%
right?
rental.
Yeah, and Jeff, I just want to ask you a question relative to taxes. I know the area, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Valerie, I think it's what, zone general business in that area? Yeah, and I'm wondering, Jeff, if a project like this is to go through, where it's obviously it's going to be rental and it's basically a business, what's the tax rate? Are they getting taxed at a residential rate, or are they going to get taxed at a commercial rate?
I don't have that answer. I'd have to get back to you.
Fair. No, that would be fair. All right, Mr. Chairman, if I can reserve a little right down the road to say something, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Kyra.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Mr. Chapin, thank you. It's great to see you again, and it was a very impressive presentation that you gave us. Many of my questions have already been answered, being the last one on the list. But just a question to Ms. Gingrich. Once we reach the 10% threshold, isn't there a time that, is it 10 years before it comes up again and rears its head that we have to meet it? So once you meet it for 2021, then it's not going to come back to us for another 10 years, is that?
I guess the easiest way to answer, you always have to meet it, but certain numbers don't change as often. So you can always add units to the list. We have some 15-year units that are falling off of the list, so those will continue to fall off as they expire. So those numbers change, as we go forward. The census data will be used for the denominator piece, the bottom number of the equation, and that doesn't change as often. But so the numbers are always changing, whether you're adding units or units are falling off.
But again, we wouldn't be in this critical position for another 10 years. That's what I was understanding.
So the census data wouldn't be for another 10 years.
Right.
Right.
So that's, okay, that's all I wanted to know. So we would, if we meet that 10% threshold, 10 years, we'll look at it again. We don't have to worry about a forced 40B coming in on us. Regarding the height or the 4 stories on each, have you considered or talked about with the family that owns the property? One of my concerns was to make sure that we try to keep the retail intact. And I know that there's a building in back of Jefferson with retail, but I also know that there's some land in the front that's owned by the family who are considering putting some retail up there. Would it make some sense or to talk about moving that retail to the front and using that additional footprint in the back in order to bring down from 4 stories to 3 stories? And that way there, it's more in line with what the community has around the town. And you still keep the retail.
We did look at that option, Mr. Harrow. Obviously, the office building, if you will, has been preserved. The front retail would be removed as a result of this. The remaining developable parcel, which I believe is what you're referring to, on the opposite side, if you will, of the tracks, that is not long enough, wide enough, et cetera, to support a multifamily building of 2 stories, 3 stories, 4 stories with proper turnaround, et cetera. It's more suited to, I'd say, probably a 1 to 3 relatively small users and retail, as opposed to something as large as what we would be proposing. So we looked at some of those options. I don't think a 3rd building there or spreading it out would make sense.
I don't think, I'm saying the building that's already in existence that has a credit union.
To take that building down?
To take that down as to have an additional footprint there. And that would bring your units down to 3 stories, and to take that credit union and move it over to the new existing retail spot, which would be in the front. I would think that the businesses would rather be in the front than in the back. And
the short answer to the question is we're not contracted to buy that piece of land, right? So that's an existing income-producing property to the family. And if they took that down, and then obviously the price, if you will, of what we'd have to do would go up. So we are not contracted to, that piece of land is not in our purchase and sale agreement to buy. Certainly it's controlled by the same family, but we have contracted to buy the 2 parcels, if you will, where the 2 buildings will sit. The remaining developable parcel remains with the family. The office building, if you will, remains with the family. That's not something that's in our jurisdiction. To keep 108 units and tear that building down, just from an economic standpoint, I won't speak for Christian or his family, but I would think that that would just put additional financial strain on them. That's an existing income-producing property, and to tear that down, even if they were to move the credit union to the front, the other businesses would have, that's an income stream to the family. So long answer, Mr. Cairo, that we're not contracted to buy that piece. We were not offered that piece.
all right, thank you.
And I have a follow-up question for Valerie, if I may. Ms. Gingrich, in your best estimation, if we weren't to vote for something like this at this time, is it possible that a project double the size could go there if we were to fall below 10%? much taller, and, yes?
Yes.
Okay. I want to give the opportunity to the manager to chime in.
So I think that this proposal is something that the board should endorse. I know that anytime there's talk about affordable housing developments, that there's a bit of a visceral reaction to express concerns. I think the situation here, as was pointed out previously, we've already been approached about a project of much greater magnitude that would be much more problematic in terms of traffic and all the associated costs in terms of response from police and fire. The development agreement that was talked about before, there's a number of items that certainly I would recommend being included in that as a means to set the expectations between both parties on the table, everything from the number of units, the composition of those units, as was previously noted, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, the percentages that were talked about, height of the building, the developer assuming the costs for preparation of the MassWorks grant, also assuming other costs, including working with our town council, who would participate or at least be working with the Board of Appeals during that process. So there's a number of different elements that I think would be included in the development agreement that would protect the town, so that we're not being overburdened by the costs associated with this project. So again, the expectation is that this would, if it is endorsed by the board, would go to the Board of Appeals, and they would have an opportunity to further discuss the parameters of this development. To say no, I think, raises a significant risk that there will be a project of some sort, whether it's at this location or another location, that we have far less ability to work collaboratively with the developer on.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Karen?
Maybe a follow-up maybe to Ms. Gingrich, Mr. Chabin. Can you address the local preference in this for affordable units? So I think that's important, that the public is aware of that.
I'd be happy to, Mr. Kyron. Thank you for pointing that out. There's a misnomer out there about the affordable apartment homes, and I think it's important. I pointed it out at the last meeting, and I think it's important to reiterate. 70% of the affordable homes are designated for Town of Wilmington. And when I say Town of Wilmington, the Zoning Board of Appeals is charged with the opportunity to designate who gets those apartment homes, whether those are folks who currently own property in the town, whether those are sons and daughters of those who own property in the town, whether those are designated or preferences are given to town employees, et cetera. The Zoning Board of Appeals will be able to take 70% of the initial lease-up of those affordable homes and designate them so that they are a preference, if you will, and that's the word that's used, for the town of Wilmington. And I appreciate the question, Mr. Kyra. We're looking forward to working with the Zoning Board of Appeals on what's important to the town, but I would hope that this board would have some input with them as well. But 70% of that 20% of the entire group will be preference for the town of Wilmington.
Thank you.
And if you could, I know you mentioned it to this board and those on, who watched the last time you were here, you talked about the breakdown in units. If you could just continue on that, the 50% one-bedrooms?
Sure. 50% of the apartment homes will be one-bedrooms, 40% of the apartment homes will be two-bedrooms, and only 10% will be three-bedrooms. 80% of the homes in total will be market rate, and 20% will be reserved for those who are at 50% of the area median income or less. But 80% of the apartment community will be market rate.
Any other commentary from my colleague, Mr. McCoy?
Yeah, just a follow-up question. It was interesting when you were talking about the units, but I've got the breakdown here. There's 54 one-bedrooms, so obviously you're not going to be putting any students into the school system. But the other thing I'm looking at is you got 43 two-bedrooms, so obviously when you get two bedrooms, obviously you're going to put kids in that room, and I get that. I mean, I understand that. And then obviously, you didn't say, but there's 11 three-bedrooms. So what happens is you're going to put like 2 kids into times 11 is 22. So we're looking at 60 to 65 students that eventually, that's going to be in the school system. And that's just, if I could just take a minute, I know you want to say something, but I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at possibility if there's other geographic areas as well. You know, so, I mean, we have to look at the whole picture as a whole, that by looking at something like this, I get that we're going to probably increase the student population, and if we have another, you know, even at the private sector, if they're going to build 2-bedroom apartments or 3-bedroom apartments, say someday at the Butters Road Bridge or on Lowell Street, because it's already got the neighborhood mix there, you know, you're talking there's a possibility of hundreds of students within a short period of time that is actually going to be in the schools. And then it's obviously is somewhat of a burden to obviously the taxpayers, because it's interesting to find out relative, once again, on the taxes. Is it going to be, and I appreciate the fact the manager's going to get back to us, but once again, let's talk about the taxes. I believe you're probably going to get taxed residential as opposed to commercial on this property because of what is being built there, but it's in that particular zone. And obviously, we have zonings in this community, and we want people to adhere to those zonings. But by granting out special permits, and I get that, you know, we're going to be increasing the student population, and obviously, is it going to be more of a tax burden, or is it going to be beneficial to the community? I think some type of these facilities is going to be more of a tax burden to the town, because now we're going to be putting a lot more students in these schools. You know, I just bring that up right now, and I just appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and, you know, I see some issues with that as well.
Mr. McCoy, I appreciate the sentiment. I think the number of students that you may be thinking will come out of a community like this is significantly exaggerated, and here's why. Number one, we will provide to the Zoning Board of Appeals an estimate based on the Citizens Housing and Planning formula. We'll be providing to the Zoning Board of Appeals sort of a formula of what we expect for students, and that's based on geography and unit type. With respect to the 2-bedroom apartment homes, with the cost of construction today and the location on 93, I would suspect that by the time this apartment community opens in April of 2021, a 2-bedroom apartment home is likely to rent for in excess of $2,800 a month plus utilities. If you go on to any of the local realtors' websites and you're looking to rent a single-family home, let's call it a 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath house, you can probably rent it for $500 less than that. So I would suggest that folks looking to come into the community on a short-term basis might have a child in a 2-bedroom above the age of 6 for a short period of time. But as a rule, paying $2,800 a month plus utilities, normally, you know, for we had up there is 1,100 square feet plus or minus in a 2-bedroom, is likely not going to attract the number of school children that it might have 10 or 15 years ago when the prices were significantly less.
You know, I respect that, but then again, if you want to play devil's advocate, you're looking at the cost of homes in Wilmington. We've already reached $500,000 on the average cost. So somebody economically would say, I might be better off renting a 2-bedroom apartment because I don't have to spend $500,000, and I'm talking of just the average home. But in Wilmington, obviously, this home's $700,000, $800,000, $900,000. There's a couple homes going for $1.1 million that they're in the process of constructing. But, you know, somebody will look at it economically, say, gee, I get a better bang for my buck if I'm going to have a 2-bedroom apartment.
In the short run, Mr. McCoy, you might well be right. You will find, and we will provide this study as well to the Zoning Board of Appeals, neighborhoods that have multifamily in them appreciate, the single-family homes appreciate at a higher rate than those that don't have multifamily in them. And there's an obvious reason why. Those who come to Wilmington, whether they're here for work, et cetera, and they choose this community, if they start putting roots in this community, they're ultimately likely to buy homes in this community. And having folks that have already experienced the community and want to buy, studies have shown over long periods of time that those who come here first and rent apartments are likely, if they like the community, to stay here and buy in the community, which does drive the price of single-family homes up. And so for those who own single-family homes, having multifamily in the community is normally a good thing. So we'll be providing that study as well to the Zoning Board of Appeals. But from a tax perspective as well, we will provide the Zoning Board of Appeals a tax study, and we look forward to seeing whether we're going to be taxed as residential or commercial, as our sort of brethren have been. But I can say this, in every community we've developed in, we ultimately provide a positive tax outcome to the town. Are there going to be school-age children here? No doubt. Are we going to be able to, with ultimately what we're going to be taxed, are we going to be a net positive to the town? Yes, we will.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any other comments or questions from my colleagues? Okay, is there a motion to endorse the LIP?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there a motion? What's your point of order, sir?
I think that this was before the board well in advance, and when you put out the.
Can you please identify yourself for the record?
My name is Ethan Sawyer, 58 Lawrence Street. And I think that this was before the board. It was known when you put the agenda out, and I didn't see anything on the agenda with reference to a vote about a LIP. So, you know, I have an issue with that. And I don't know, so I don't know if you can really do this today.
Well, thank you for your point of order. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion's been made and second. Is there discussion?
Yeah, how about a discussion? I get it, I know it's not a public hearing, but I don't know how many residents are here. I mean, I'd be interested to hear from some residents on some input, because obviously some folks that are in this room, you know, want to have some questions, because obviously it's their quality of life too. But you're the chairman, I'll let you do what you need to do, but I would have no issue listening to some folks, and you control it. It's up to you.
Absolutely. We have public comment coming up shortly.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I would just ask, is the motion intended to read as was presented on the, in the sample by the developer?
Mr. Kyron, is your motion?
Yes.
Thank you. It does. Any further discussion?
I would like to ask town council who's sitting here today, if it's appropriate to take this vote without
Excuse
having
me.
informed the
Could you
public.
identify yourself again, sir?
I'm still Ethan Sawyer. I still live at 58 Lawrence Street.
Thank you.
And I would like to ask town council if this is appropriate. I feel it is not.
So
And you've made this mistake before.
You've asked your question. Sir, can you answer, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Attorney General's office has indicated that, as a general rule, when you have something on the agenda and you indicate you're going to have a discussion about something, chances are that there might be a vote, and that unless it's a standing agenda item, that is an ongoing discussion item over a number of meetings, where people would rightly assume that it's just going to be discussion with no vote. In that instance, you should add the words potential vote, but the AG has indicated that you don't have to specify that you intend to vote, that is sort of presumed when you're going to have a discussion item.
So in your opinion, a vote tonight would be legal?
Yes.
Thank you.
Point of order.
Sir?
Frank West, 2 Birchwood Road.
Thank you.
On the agenda, it says, Andrew Chabin, Chief Executive Officer, Princeton Properties, regarding affordable housing proposal on Jefferson Road.
Correct.
That's the agenda item. Further down on your agenda, you have board to consider placing an article on May 2nd, 2020 annual town meeting warrant for a senior center.
That's correct.
I'm assuming that that's going to be a vote of your board.
I would imagine.
But it seems like the other one that I read, it doesn't sound like you guys are going to take an action. It sounds like this gentleman is going to talk.
Well, Mr. West, having sat up here yourself, I can imagine that you've taken some votes under appointments as well in the past. Am I wrong?
I honestly don't know, but I think that this is a wrong situation. I think that the public, if you're going to allow public comments after a vote, you should allow public comments before a vote so that this board can be heard by the people in this audience, many of them, like myself, you know, more or less neighbors to the property.
Well, thank you for your comment. Number one, council has advised us that this would be legal to take this action this evening. And number two, this is now, these gentlemen have been before this board multiple times in public meetings, where last time I allowed folks to, out of order, public comments, and we did solicit comment at that time.
Point of order. Point of order. Ethan Sawyer, 58 Lawrence Street. The last time that they came before the board, it was with a blank slate, as they said, and things have changed significantly And I feel that everyone who showed up here to comment on this is being denied the opportunity to be heard by the Board of Selectmen before you make the vote. I'm not even saying I'm opposed to this, but I would like to speak. I think that we have valid questions. I would love to see more affordable housing in Wilmington. I think that this can be a very good project, and I've liked a lot of what I've heard, but I don't like being denied the ability to speak about things that impact our community, that are important to the people who are sitting here.
Well, Mr. Sawyer, two things, if I may respond to that. Number one, this is the third time you spoke. And number two, the public will always have an opportunity to speak at our meetings. Long before I was chair, while I'm chair, and I'm sure after I'm chair, we always have public comment, and we always will solicit public comment. Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second on the table. Are there any further discussion from the members of the board? Seeing none, call for the vote. All in favor? And all opposed? The motion passes 4-1. Mr. Shaven. There'll be order, please. Thank you. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I want to appreciate your transparency throughout this process. We look forward to hearing more, and we wish you good luck. I'm sure the manager will be in contact. Also, Mr. Hull will get back to Mr. McCoy for his question.
Yes. Right.
And we'll be in touch on how we'll proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members.
Best of luck. Okay. I apologize, we are behind. We want to welcome our next appointment. It's with Ms. Samantha Reef, our Health and Recovery Coordinator. I see our Police Chief Joe Desmond is accompanying her, and they're going to provide us with an update on efforts in 2019 and also upcoming programs. Good evening to you both.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the opportunity to come before you. It's a good time of the year to kind of review what went on in 2019, and Samantha's been doing some outstanding work, and we just thought we could update you, and if you had any questions about her efforts, certainly you can ask them.
So just a brief review of 2019, going into my third year here, so this is my second full year. In the year 2019, I got 236 referrals by police. So those are generated by if police and or fire respond to a either emergency or non-emergency call, and there is identified either a mental health or a substance use or kind of like a gray zone concern. They will forward that report to me, and I will provide outreach to an individual or a family. Not 100% is outreach due to either if it's not appropriate for outreach or if it's already someone that we've worked with in the past or are currently working with. And we are still doing referrals and, work with people that don't necessarily come in contact with law enforcement. So we're kind of still keeping that door open. On an average ongoing basis, I work with about 10 to 15 people or families, and that's obviously always kind of a revolving door as crises or as scenarios evolve. Continuing to do family meetings, team meetings, really trying to partner and provide support for families and individuals. Some initiatives that we've had in the last year, we started a mental health communication tool as we kind of identified that there was a gap in communication when someone is transported to the hospital for a mental health or substance use concern. Information and communication was not always being relayed to emergency room staff, so frequently there was a quick turnaround, and so we introduced a mental health communication tool to accompany the individual to the hospital in order to reduce any miscommunications and to hopefully help with that access to care. Hospitals have been very receptive to this and have reported that this has been a good introduction of a tool. As far as the Wilmington Substance Abuse Coalition, in September we had our 4th vigil for substance use. That was a celebration of individuals who have found their recovery and a night of remembrance of individuals who have been lost to substance use. We also kicked off a Recoveries and Allies book club, which meets 3 times a year, open to the public, free of charge, and we invite an author who's written a book along the lines of substance use, whether it's someone in recovery, whether it's a family member, whatever that might be. So we had our first one in October, and our next one is coming up on February 6th, and those are typically held at the Banyan Treatment Center at 66K Concord Street. And we also offered 3 different mental health first aid trainings. So it's a 8-hour training to educate attendees about mental health, substance use, eating disorders, a wide variety of different things that could be going on. We did one for the community. We partnered with the Senior Center to offer a 4-part training for seniors, and we did one for police and dispatch. Additionally, we are in our 2nd year of having a recovery coach on staff, so she is part-time, about 20 hours a week. She is someone that identifies as being in long-term recovery and really can relate and partner well with individuals that we're working with that have substance use kind of on that peer level. So she's been a great asset. She's actively working with about 6 individuals on a rolling basis. She also took over the podcast, and that's put out on a monthly basis. She has guests come in, and that's through WCTV, and she's had some good feedback with that as well. As far as grants, we got a town hall grant, and that grant was, I did a call for presenters, or a call for middle schoolers, and I got 3 6th grade boys who really put together a program of their choosing, and they were empowered to make a program, and they decided that they wanted to do a 3-part series for their 6th grade peers around underage drinking, vaping, drug use, the like. And so they really ran with that, and they found their presenters, and that will be completed during 3 different assemblies in the spring in the schools. So that was really nice to see kind of some of our youth be able to take hold of that and run with it. Also been partnering with the schools on the vaping diversion program through another grant we received. Some data sharing collaboratives we've had. So this past year, we've started partnering with local agencies to share information after overdoses. So frequently, in Lowell, for example, there are overdoses of Wilmington residents that we might never know about because they happened in Lowell. So our boards of health have come together to put together so that we can share some of that data so that appropriate outreach can happen within their hometowns. I think that's mostly what I have. Some upcoming events, though. January 23rd at 7 p.m. we have an event called Marijuana, Vaping, and You, and it's a night. We have a really great series of presenters who will talk about marijuana, vaping, the effects, kind of current trends, research, and it's open to anyone 12 or older. We are asking just that if kids come, that your parents come too, so that you can keep having that conversation once you go home. It's going to be at St. Thomas's Church. It's not a religious event. It's just being held there, so anyone, regardless of a religion or lack thereof, can certainly attend. It is free of charge. If there's any additional questions or for more information, we have a Facebook page, Wilmington Substance Abuse Coalition, that you can find out more information about that. And like I said, the February 6th, our 2nd book club will be at Banyan, and our book this month, or next month, will be Loving Lions. It's by Mike Wilson. So that's, I think, most of my updates. I know that was a lot.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate all the work that you're doing for our community. Each year, you seem to be adding more and more to your repertoire, if you will, what you're doing. I mean, I've literally seen you deployed out in the community, working with folks, so we really appreciate that. And I particularly am appreciative for the partnership you've developed with the schools. I think we can all agree how important it is for you and your message to get to our youth, so we really, really appreciate that work that you've done. And obviously, the police department. I think we have a very compassionate police department led by Chief Desmond, and I think we really pride ourselves on that. The way you police, I think, is greatly respected by the people in this community.
Thank you.
So, open it up for my colleagues. Mr. McCoy?
You said it best, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the fact, Samantha, what you do in this community. I mean, we really need to help souls out there, and if we can educate, I think you're doing a great job. I hear all positive things. I was really happy to support the budget when we started the program. I think Jeff did a great job putting it together, because I think, you know, we're a leader in the Commonwealth, not just in the Merrimack Valley area, and the chief does a great job. And I remember being at the candlelight vigil, and I remember the chairman gave a speech, and I even said to him, I thought he gave a great, passionate speech. It was really moving. And it's really good when we can try to help folks in this community. And I'm a firm believer in trying to just help folks. Thank you.
Yes. I echo my colleagues' comments, and it's great that you're working with the schools. That's most important, for sure. Still astounds me to hear that there's still over 230 referrals a year. Is pretty sad when that continues to grow. And you're doing so much work and so much positive work, and you're to be commended for the visibility that you're putting out there in the community, and making people aware where they can go, where they can get help. How about, veterans groups? Yeah, I'm sure you have some collaboration with our veterans. You didn't really mention too much about it.
Yeah, so Lou and I partner very closely. He'll frequently call me if there's a case that has kind of a more of a significant mental health or substance use component. We work on and off with different individuals, and certainly help to support each other's efforts in the overlap.
Thank you.
Mrs. O'Mahony?
I just want to reiterate what's already been said a little bit, and just also acknowledge, especially with the seniors being here tonight, I truly appreciate the education to seniors. In my day job, it's become more and more prevalent, where we have grandparents having to parent grandchildren because of mental health and substance abuse issues of their children, and it's definitely a learning experience, I think, for a lot of people who don't deal with it firsthand, who can't identify some of the issues going on. I hate the number 236, but I love the fact that the referrals were coming to you, and we're working more on outreach and rehabilitation versus kind of punishment. I think that's the right direction for this crisis. And I also appreciate all that you're doing in the schools, especially having children in the high school, and knowing kind of vaping. You know, I think it's important for our community to understand we're not in a bubble on this. And that it affects us as much as it affects the bigger cities around us. And, you know, I love that you're communicating with those cities, because it is accurate that, you know, Wilmington people are going to other cities to sometimes have to do things like this, and we need to know that information, because they're coming back home and they need the help and support here as much as we can give them. So I really appreciate that you're trying to tackle that, because it's a huge task that you have in front of you.
Thank you. Mr. Eaton?
Ms. Reef, I want to welcome you back. I think it's been about a year since you were before us last, and I think at that point, we had only just recently received a grant, I think from the Cummings Foundation, for that coaching position. So it's good to see that that position has worked out, and that has been a value add to the work that you do with the police department and several other departments that your work overlaps with. I know I've said this to you in the past, and I always ask how busy you are, because I hope someday the answer is going to be no calls, nothing to do today. But until then, I want you to keep up the great work, because you're providing I think a very difficult service that must be very taxing on you, but it certainly is helping out folks in town that very, very much need it. So I know that all of us appreciate the work that you're doing, and I want you to keep it up. So good work.
Absolutely, and good work it is you're doing, definitely. So my final question for you, if somebody's watching at home and they're struggling themselves, or they have a loved one struggling, could you remind us of the ways we could reach out? I know you mentioned the Facebook page, but what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so you can always drop into the station. I have some non-traditional hours, Monday and Thursdays. I work 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Fridays, I work 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Obviously, there's some extenuating circumstances in those two. So you can always stop in. You can also email just sreef@wpd.org. or you can call either the station, they know who I am, or yeah, the website is another great opportunity.
Sure, and I would imagine if there's an officer in their neighborhood, that they would know how to get a hold of you as well, so.
Yep.
Absolutely.
They all have my business card in their pockets.
And if she's not available, you know, we certainly know how to refer people at this point and where to go, so, you know, if she's not available, by all means, still come in and contact us.
Well, again, I think Mr. Eaton said it best. Please keep up the good work. We really appreciate the work that you're doing. This is such a vital resource for the members of our community to have you and the police department working on our behalf in regards to this. I do want to plug your event one more time. It's the January 23rd, 7 o'clock at St. Thomas. It's Marijuana, Vape, and You, and we're encouraging folks to attend. And if you're going to bring children, please have them accompanied by an adult. Got that right?
Perfect.
Thank you both for being here. Appreciate it. Best of luck. Okay, we'll move into communications. We have 3 pieces of communication this evening. Mr. Hall.
Yes, under the first item of communication, this is with respect to the 2020 annual town meeting and fiscal 21 budget calendar. Essentially, the high notes are that the budget presentation will be made at the board's next meeting on January 27th. Following that, the Finance Committee begins its meetings on January 28th here at the Town Hall. February 7th is the last day to submit petition warrant articles. February 10th is the last day to submit non-petition zoning articles from departments. February 14th is the last day to submit non-petition articles other than zoning. And then February 24th, the board will receive a preliminary review of the warrant articles. March 9th, the board will be asked to sign the warrant. March 17th is the Joint Finance Committee Planning Board hearing. April 20th is the town meeting warrant will be mailed out to residents. The 25th of April is the election for local elections. And then May 2nd will be the annual town meeting at 10:30 a.m.
Thank you.
Next is the memo from me to just outlining the Finance Committee meeting schedule. So again, on the 28th, this will be a general overview, a budget overview, revenue, general government, debt service, unclassified statutory charges and insurance. Then on the 30th of January, planning and conservation, the building inspector, and Board of Health, Board of Appeals. Tuesday, February 4th is the Department of Public Works. Thursday, February 6th is the Veterans Services and Elderly Services. Tuesday, February 11th, Public Buildings. Thursday, February 13th, Public Library, Recreation and Historical Commission. I would note that all those meetings will be occurring here at the Town Hall in Room 9. Tuesday, February 25th, Police Department, Public Safety, Dispatch, and Fire. That actually will be taking place at the Public Safety Building. Thursday, February 27th, Town Clerk and Information Technology. And then Tuesday, March 3rd at Shawshene Tech, the Finance Committee will be meeting with the Shawshene Tech School District. Thursday, March 5th, the Finance Committee will meet with the Wilmington Public Schools at the high school. Next is a memo from me with regard to plans for feasibility study and schematic design for school town admin building. This is a bit of a warm-up, so to speak, to the budget that will be proposed to the Board of Selectmen on the 27th of this month. As will be discussed later this evening with respect to the senior center, as a follow-up on the feasibility, the master plan that was completed in 2018, I'm proposing that the town authorize the expenditure of $955,000 from free cash for the beginning stages of a feasibility study and schematic design for a town hall school administration building. The discussion has been put forward in the past. If there's no question, the school admin building, which has served well, in spite of its deficiencies for many years now. It was never really intended to be a school admin building. It's a Victorian home that the school department is making do with and has made do with for many, many years. Less than 5,000 square feet in space. Many of their staff are not able to be located at that location, including their student services personnel, which are at other locations. This building here was converted in 1984 to be the temporary town hall. It's certainly done its job to that point, but as you can see just from this forum that we're in, while it certainly serves the purpose, it's not the most conducive to public meetings in terms of PowerPoint presentations and the ability to oftentimes hear what is happening up here, not to mention the space constraints that we have throughout this building. And so it's my proposal that we begin to look at citing a new town school admin building and also begin schematic design. In doing that, that will also free up this space, so to speak, to the extent that it's determined that this is not the location for a future town school admin building. To the extent that it's better suited for another purpose, that purpose can be pursued. I think it's going to be very difficult to the extent that there is a desire to locate another building here while we have an active town hall going on. I think it's going to be problematic to put another facility here unless we're looking at taking out the fields out in the back here. So this is a proposal that I will be putting forward as part of my budget.
Thank you. We have 3 items for board to consider this evening.
First under board to consider is a request from the Sons of Italy. Wilmington Sons of Italy will be running our 4th annual Antique and Collectors Car Show on Sunday, July 26th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. We'd like to request the use of the town common parking lot in the 4th of July building for this year's event, like we did the last 3 years. There will be some setup the night before, and we would be setting up at 7 a.m. and closing down no later than 4 p.m. On the day of the show. The event will be the same as last year. Once again, we will be collaborating with Dominators Car Club. There will be a charge for show cars to enter. We expect about 125 show cars at the event. Sons of Italy will be selling hot dogs, hamburgers, sausage, snacks, sodas, water, coffee, donut, muffins at the event as well. This year, we will also again be collaborating with the Wilmington Farmers Market, which will take place at the Swain Green area on this day as well. The event will be free of charge to residents of Wilmington to come and enjoy. So that is, again, requested for July 26th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Okay, is there a motion? Motion's made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's made and second. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you to the Sons of Italy.
Next under board to consider are the recommendations of the Inhabitant Bylaw Committee. This, you'll recall, was brought before the board back in November. The town clerk put forward and made a presentation on the recommendations that came from the Inhabitant Bylaw Study Committee, and the board at the time had indicated there was a desire to consider the recommendations and to receive input. I would suggest that the board make some judgments as to which, if any, of these recommendations to bring forward. To the extent the board is interested in bringing forward recommendations, they will need to be prepared in the form of articles for submission to town meeting.
So I'm open to however you want to handle this. I see some commentary already.
I'll just start off real quick. Mr. Chairman, the bylaw committee's having a meeting tomorrow night, 7 o'clock here at the town hall. And I know there were some concerns of selectmen that they did like certain things that the bylaw committee offered and some things they didn't like, and I get that. And so we're obviously going to sit down tomorrow, take a look at the big picture and just and hopefully come back to the board at a future date. And like I said, I see Mr. De Palma, who's a member who's done an outstanding job. He's in the audience, and we're just going to listen to everybody. That's what we're going to do.
Mr. Eaton?
Yeah, my commentary was along the same lines. I did see that that agenda was posted, and their only real substantive item on the agenda was to discuss the commentary that we had provided. So I'd hope that we could hold off. I know we don't usually take up too many other items on our next meeting because it's Mr. Hull's budget presentation, but at the same time, I do want to certainly allow that committee to provide responses to us and respect the time that those people have volunteered to review so that this is more of a conversation rather than a decision that we're making without hearing from them first.
Absolutely. If somebody wants to, I'll entertain a motion to table this vote, if that's the pleasure of this board. Otherwise, it could proceed.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Bennett.
Okay, the motion's been made and second to table this discussion. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's unanimous. We'll table that to our next meeting on the 27th, which we will also hear the budget from the manager. Thank you. And thank you to the bylaw committee for their work they'll do and have done. Our final board to consider item.
The next board to consider is placing an article on the May 2nd, 2020 annual town meeting for a senior center. As you will find in your packet, I've submitted a memo to the board recommending that the pursuit of a senior center really be done in phases. I know at the last meeting there was a rough estimate presented for an appropriation to be made to cover the full cost of both, of all aspects of the project as I understand it. My recommendation is that this be taken in two phases, similar to the approach that I'm proposing for a town school admin building. The first piece being to have a feasibility study and schematic design. As was done with the high school, the town did not just appropriate the full boat all at one time. There was a little over $1 million appropriated at a town meeting in 2010, I believe it was, to first of all do the site work and review options for high school. That was then followed by a more significant appropriation for the building itself. The value in taking this two-step approach is that by going through the feasibility piece, first of all, there has not been a particular site that has been identified as the location for the senior center. There's been many locations talked about. Certainly the existing site has been talked about as a possibility. The town hall has been talked about, the property next to St. Dorothy's, even the former Whitfield School has come up at one time or another, but there's not been any definitive location. The cost of constructing a new senior center is going to be in part based upon the site, whether the site has access to water and sewer, whether there's ledge. There's any number of issues that need to be identified for the particular site that's slated for development. So to go into this without knowing what your site is, I think could spell problems in terms of the appropriation amount. By going through schematic design, an OPM, which is an owner's project manager, would be hired. That's required by state law for any project that exceeds $1.5 million in cost. And they essentially represent the town in working with the architect to guide both the town and the architect through the process. But an architect would then be hired to literally lay out the space in that building, the rooms, all of the elements that go into a building. And once that is put together, part of the end product of that, if you will be an estimated cost for this building. And then once that is determined, then I would suggest that the information that comes from the schematic design be brought forward for vote of at a town meeting. And we'll have a better idea as to what the cost will be, because number one, we'll know what the site is. We'll know what the size of the building is. The feasibility master plan suggested a possible size of the building being something in the order of 14,000 to 16,000 square feet. That was a rough estimate, but again, I think that needs to be fleshed out as to what the precise needs are and what the square footage of that building is, without having that information right now, to just simply suggest $8 million or $9 million without knowing the site, the size of the building, the number of floors, all of those elements could mean that the town has to come back to a future town meeting for additional funding, or in the alternative, reduce the scope and scale of the project if the money that is put forward isn't enough to carry the day.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hull, for this recommendation. I look forward to supporting this recommendation. I think this is the appropriate first step in the goal of trying to get a new senior center. I know from our previous meetings that everybody up here is supportive of and eventually have a new senior center. We want to make sure that we do it fiscally responsibly. And I think this is the first step, the same step that we took to get the new high school, the same step we took to get the new public safety building, and the same step we took to get the new middle school at the time. So I think this puts us in a good position to make sure that we get the correct number for the cost of this project. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you reached out to the architect who did the high school to give us a rough estimate of what a project like this might cost?
That's right. So I talked to the architect that was involved. Actually, he was the owner's project manager on the high school, and the estimated cost for the feasibility study and schematic design is $650,000. So I would be recommending that those funds at town meeting be transferred from free cash for the purpose of beginning this process.
And this would identify a single spot where we should put the new senior center.
That's right. I mean, certainly this would be a public process, and the OPM and the architect would work with the permanent building committee and the senior community to look at the various sites, but ultimately there would be one site that would be the preferred site. Once that is identified, then the architect would begin work on the specifics of that site, geotechnical work, whatever's needed to come up with the price for construction.
Thank you. Mr. Kyra?
Yes, I'd make a motion that we approve the recommendation of the town manager in regards to a senior center as submitted.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that for discussion.
Okay, second. Is there discussion?
Yeah,
Mr.
if I
McCoy?
could, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make a couple of quick comments, and I respect where the manager's coming with this. And I think the bottom line is, and I understand what you're saying, you're looking to spend $650,000 from free cash to come up with a feasibility study. I know that the master plan facility spends a lot of time, the permanent building committee, who's basically the author of this, spends a lot of time, and I know they designated multiple areas. And one of the areas here for a senior center was talked about was the town hall, because at the end of the street, you have sewer and you also have gas. The big question is, how are we going to be paying for all this? I understand the manager stated he'd rather do a debt exclusion. When I'm looking at something that we have basically two accounts, $38 million in free cash, I'd feel very uncomfortable to go to the taxpayers and say, I want to raise your taxes, I want to do a debt exclusion because we're going to build, one of these facilities, either a town hall or a senior center. And what I'm looking at is, and I know Diane Allen did a great job. She was at the senior center. She brought down the timeline. When it comes down to putting out the RFPs, and when you're talking about interviewing a consultant, so it takes time. I think it's going to take us a lot more time by the plan that we're going. I don't think we're going to see anything till 2023, 2024 of actually doing anything. It just makes sense to me, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the manager, that we need to know what the price tag is. We need to know how we're going to be spending the money. I mean, I'm sure there's folks in the general audience and folks watching at home going to say, I'm being taxed at the max. I don't want to be spending any more money on taxes. If we have this money in the bank, why don't we fund that? It's no different than when you have a home. Do you really, if you got X amount of dollars, $100,000, say, in your bank account. It's gonna cost you $50,000 to put an addition on, which I know it's a lot more than that. Just give you an example. Do you wanna go get a loan, or if you have that money, you can spend that $50,000 and still have $50,000 in the bank, and without spending an extra dollar to a debt to a family? No difference, there's no magic credit card out there. There's no difference in a municipality. And I just think that the right approach is, you know, not at this meeting, but we're the Board of Selectmen. We can wave a magic wand and do anything that we want. I would think it would be more prudent for the town to take a look at the cost of what it would cost to actually do a senior center, put it all rolled in as one, all right? And if people are gonna wanna vote a debt exclusion, well, that's the folks what they're gonna do, but I don't think we should take any money from the taxpayers. Let's use the free cash, come up with one price on whether it's gonna be design, construction, engineering, you know, contingencies. I mean, they put that in projects all the time. You know, I know we'll have difference of opinion here, but I think that's another approach that we could do. And I think would be more beneficial as a community, and we'd save the taxpayers, plain and simple.
Yeah, just correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what we're trying to do with this proposal. We're trying to figure out what the cost is and where the location.
Well, we don't have to spend this, first of all, you're looking to go to the town meeting to raise $600,000, to take it from free cash and put it in, and then hire someone to, you know, come up with a feasibility study. The permanent building committee spent a long time. The master facility plan, you know, they spent a lot of time. They designated, once again, they designated this area, which is 20 acres, to be a possible site. You know, what happens if you allocate these monies and then people say, well, how are you gonna pay for it? Well, we're gonna be doing our debt exclusion. Some folks might say, I'm not gonna vote a debt exclusion. So we just wasted $650,000 in order to do that. Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong. Years ago, when I was opposed to the construction of the library, back then, because I knew we would be coming for town hall a decade later, did we spend it, there was talk about doing a feasibility study back then.
Yes.
Did we spend any money on a feasibility study on the library?
I believe we did, yes.
Yeah, what we did, I think it's a couple $100,000, I think, what we spent.
I don't recall that
I don't know,
number.
but there was a dollar amount, and the bottom line is the funding got voted down. So we just spent and wasted that money, those monies, to do a feasibility study, and at the end of the day, the citizens decided not to fund it. And that happened, and that was back then, back in 2005. You know, here we are, 15 years later, we're looking to do something similar. I think we're better off, and that's my own opinion, to put it all under one roof on the feasibility study, what it's gonna cost for, you know, what it's gonna cost for construction, site work, architect, contingencies, and do it that way, and let the citizens make that decision. I'd hate to see us spend all these monies. We're spending $955,000 on a feasibility study for the possibility of a town hall, and let's say when it comes time for a debt exclusion, that's what the town manager wants to see us do, and people don't vote that debt exclusion. Well, we just spent $1 million on something that we could have used for something else. I mean, I know we'll have difference of opinions up here in the audience, I get that, but I think just let me know what it's gonna cost, come back to another meeting, and then just do it all under one roof of what the exact cost is gonna be, and how we're gonna pay for it. I'd prefer to take the money out of free cash or to fund that and not raise anybody's taxes. That's how I see it.
I'm sorry, did I miss the location? What would be the proposed location?
Well, obviously, the master plan facilities, they come up with a couple locations, but one of them here is here at the town hall. They designated this area to be a possibility of a senior center. No different than the high school. Let's say we built a senior center here. Well, the town hall would still function as a town hall for the time being. You know, that would happen, obviously. You know, I just, you know, and I know we talk about North Wilmington, a fire substation, which I think that's essential, that we need to do. But going to the voters and just asking them for more money right now, I just don't see it happening. I don't see it happening.
I want to give the manager the opportunity to respond to that.
2 points. First of all, I have not indicated that my desire is to go for a debt exclusion. That has not been said. I think is that an option that we may consider, but that isn't the approach that I'm proposing. And I guess to use the analogy that you spoke of is if you have $100,000 and you had $50,000 in home repairs, you know, instead of borrowing, just taking the $50,000, I might not do that, because if I had $100,000 and I'm going to rely on that to maintain a standard of living for the next 25 years, you know, that $100,000 is going to need to get me through the next 25 years. So I might, in fact, still borrow some money. I mean, and the same holds true with the town town finances. We've got a very healthy amount of available funds, there's no question. But to just draw that down in the matter of a couple of projects, and then what happens? What happens when the economy goes down and we, you know, there's this seems to be a sense that we're not going to run into a recession at any point in time, in spite of the fact that we had the greatest recession since the Great Depression not too long ago. So, you know, we have to be prepared for those kind of things. I believe it's more prudent, rather than, and I respect Diane Allen's efforts to come up with a number, but, you know, it was based upon many assumptions. We don't have a location for where this is going to go. We have no particulars whatsoever as to the size of this building, the number of rooms, any of the features of the building, and yet we're coming up with a number that we're going to town meeting on. I think that's ill-advised to be telling people at town meeting that we're looking for a number without having any substantive rationale for that number. We don't, I mean, I'm not an expert in terms of architectural services or renderings. You know, that's why we hire the experts. We didn't go to town meeting right out of the gate and look for, you know, a random number for the town meeting, for the high school appropriation. We went, first of all, to confirm that the high school was going to be the location. That wasn't always intended to be the location. There was discussion about potentially putting the high school at the Salem Street, some property, the Salem Street property. So that was vetted. The high school was vetted, and ultimately it was decided to put it there. Once we determined that it was going to be the location, then there were particular studies done on that property to make sure we had a good idea on that particular site, and then it was designed in terms of schematics. So all of that work was done before we went to the voters to look for, in that case, a debt exclusion. But I would not have wanted to be the person to have to go back to town meeting after having gone through that process because we didn't get the number right. And that's what I'm concerned about here. If we just use a number but that has really no basis to get it all in one shot.
Want to let Mrs. O'Mahony chime in?
Yes, thank you. So I made it clear that I believe the senior center should be our priority, and I still say that as much as I said it the first time I spoke at the Elder Services Commission a few months ago. But the reality is we need a plan. Right? I think at the last meeting someone said, just give us the money and we'll figure it out. And I ask you, if that was presented to us for any municipal building or any municipal project in this town, how would you respond if we said, okay, this chaotic information being presented to us with numbers being thrown around and inflated, and there's no basis for it. So we're now saying we want to hire an expert to put together a plan that makes sense. And I get your concern is that that plan could take years to put together. So the reason I didn't second the motion is because I think we need to tighten it up a little bit. I think we should be voting tonight on a feasibility study. I agree with the town manager's recommendation that the vote tonight should be for the feasibility study so that we can get an OPM, an expert on board, to put together a solid plan. What I would ask for is if we can't build it into the article, if there's somehow we can do a resolution of our board, that OPM is going to give regular updates to the Elder Services Commission and the Board of Selectmen as the feasibility study process begins right after the town meeting of 2020. When those funds are appropriated and voted on, we would want regular updates as to where the feasibility study stands. I would further want a resolution because the town manager is saying that it would be on the 2021 town meeting for the funding. We'd have a plan in place before that May or April 2021 town meeting, and we'd vote on that plan. So we'd get the accurate funds. And we'd rely on our town account and the municipal bond advisor that we have to tell us the best way to fund it. Not that we're going to be asking taxpayers necessarily to fund anything, but don't you go to a financial advisor when you're trying to figure out the best way to fund something? I know I'm doing that for college education right now, and that's what we should be doing on these projects, not just saying, okay, we're going to give $9 million to the project and hope that that's enough. So my suggestion, my opinion on this is we would vote tonight for the feasibility study, for the funding for the feasibility study. I would ask this board to consider a resolution that once the OPM is appointed, we would have regular updates to our board and to the Elder Services Commission. And further, if that feasibility study is somehow completed prior to the 2021 town meeting, that this board would allow the 60 days to do a special town meeting to consider it separately, so that you don't have to wait a minute longer. But let's get a solid plan in place. I don't understand how we're relying on chaotic information with no substance behind it to make such an important decision. I agree your time is now, but I also think that you deserve the very best thoughtful plan that we can put together for you, like we did for the high school, like we did for the middle school, like we've done for so many other school opportunities in town. And if you don't agree with that, tell me where it's wrong to have thoughtful planning. I would love to know why a thoughtful plan isn't warranted in this situation when it would be expected in every other situation in town. Thank you.
Mr. Reed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to state that I do think that the senior center is very much a priority. I think all of us agree that the current Bazell school site is insufficient to meet the current needs of our town seniors, and we're all well aware of the growing demographic that it serves. So it will only be delivering diminishing returns with respect to the facility itself. Myself and a couple of my colleagues did attend the Elderly Services Commission meeting in November, and I remember speaking to a member of the community after that meeting, and she was a part of, I think, a subcommittee that was traveling to different communities to look at other senior centers to see what they had done, and she'd explained that the purpose of these visits were not just to find out what other communities were doing right with their senior centers, but more importantly to find out what these communities had done wrong so that we could learn from other mistakes that communities had made. With your permission, Mr. Chair, I would like to put our state delegation on the spot a little bit, as I know I am wont to do, because I did watch the Elderly Services Commission meeting last month in December, and Representative Robertson, I will ask you, because you did make a lot of comments during the Elderly Services Commission meeting last month about the possibility of state funding, and please correct me if I am misstating the underlying point that you were making, but I believe it to be that if we were to go to town meeting and vote and approve an article that would pay soup to nuts, tip to tail for a feasibility study, schematic design, and then construction of a senior center, that might inhibit your ability and your colleagues' ability to secure any state funding to help subsidize the cost of a senior center.
Representative?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. You were Senator Tarr and I came down as well. So, yeah, when we were at the Services Commission, there was a discussion on what state funding was. Primarily, we were looking at what the original number, which was tossed out, was $200,000. Now, we've seen since that meeting, at the time, $200,000, as Senator Tarr has demonstrated, was $200,000 that was brought back for the planning and feasibility design of the North Wilmington train station. So it's something that's reasonably available for us to go and pursue for state funding in the supplemental budget. $650,000 is a bit more of a heavy lift. What the proposal was at the time was that indeed if we're going forward with the feasibility study, after having a discussion with Senator Tarr, we'll see what we can do to support the town. Now, from my understanding at that meeting, and the impression I was trying to give, the town could front the money, but we would be able to bring that back and help subsidize through it. And essentially, in a sense, not legally and technically speaking, but act as if it was a reimbursement to the municipality to help facilitate that. And again, that was just to keep the project moving, because as you and your colleagues and everyone here in the audience, this is one of the 3 major priorities in town. We need to get it underway. So I'm just looking to contribute. Having that feasibility study, though, makes it a heck of a lot easier for us to go to the folks who helped allocate the budget and place it saying, this is our plan, this many square feet, this much potential for expansion, this many lots. It gives us something real to point to. And I can't tell you how much easier that will make it for us.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. I do want to thank you, Mr. Tarr, and also Representative Gordon for the work that the 3 of you have done with securing some supplemental funding for the North Wilmington commuter rail station. But back to the discussion that we are a part of, I am wary of trying to do it all now, especially because we don't know the who, what, when, and where of what this is going to be. I don't think that the expectation should be that if we are to vote on something at town meeting that would cover the entire cost from design through construction, that on this date, a year from now, that construction would have even began. I think that it actually doesn't really delay by much, if at anything, and I do agree with Ms. O'Mahony that if for some reason or somehow we catch lightning in a bottle and the schematic design and the feasibility study are completed early, then I don't think the folks at the senior center are certainly going away. I think that this is a priority that is only going to continue to grow, and I think that providing regular updates as to how those are going, if they are completed early, I think it would behoove us to move quicker rather than later, because the cost of construction over the last 10 years has really just continued to rise. I think if we do bifurcate it, so we do a feasibility study and schematic design this year, and then an appropriation in, I guess, in 2021, just in my own head, for it would be so the following year. I really don't think we're losing all that much time. It seems like we're giving our state delegation some ammunition to go to the State House and help get the other 350 communities in the Commonwealth to help pay for it, because if they can secure some funding for this, I certainly would prefer that over having the 23,000 folks in town pay for the entirety of it. And I view one of the most important roles of being on this board as being a steward of open town meeting. With all due respect, Mr. McCoy, I don't think that just because with the Board of Selectmen we can just wave a magic wand and make something happen. The big decisions are left to the folks at town meeting. We are, I think, responsible for the articles that we put on the warrant for town meeting, and we want to make sure that it is done in an organized fashion, to just dovetail on Selectman O'Mahony's point, and make sure that people know what they're getting. And I want a senior center, and I want it in the near-term future, because I think it's overdue, and it is very desperately needed, and is only going to continue to become more needed by this community. But that being said, I'm very wary of supporting an article where we're really just guessing at a number. We don't yet have a location. We don't know what the parking capacity is going to be. We don't know what the square footage is going to be. We don't know if it's going to accommodate the current programming that the senior center offers. We don't know what specific programs are going to be added to the senior center because of it, because we're really just hoping that the amount of money that we're providing is going to be enough. We don't know if it's going to be here. We don't know if it's going to be the St. Dorothy site. We don't know if it's going to be the current site, the Swain Green, the Whitfield site, or someplace else. What I would prefer to do is move forward with the schematic design and the feasibility study in this year, and as Ms. O'Mahony has stated, really keep our thumb on the pulse of the issue so that we're getting regular updates, as is the Elderly Services Commission, as we're really working together with the short-term goal of making an appropriation so that we can build a senior center for this town. Not just a senior center that was done in short order and the result was we compromised some of the things that the folks in town wanted. I mean, I was at that the Elderly Services Commission meeting back in November, and then I watched again in December, and I've spoken to folks in the community who've listed specific, and the presentation that we listened to last month, listed specific senior centers that are not too far from here that made critical mistakes that they would have done over had they had the opportunity. And I want to make sure that the senior center that we build is the right one for the town. And if we do the appropriation for a schematic design and feasibility study in 2020, and fingers crossed, an appropriation for the construction and design in 2021, folks in town are going to know in 2021 what they are voting for. They're going to know what the location is going to be. Again, they're going to know that the parking problems that they have right now are addressed. They're going to know how big it is, what it's going to look like. I don't imagine, and I'm not in the business of predicting the future, but I don't think that the money that was spent on a feasibility study for the library is going to be repeated here, because I really don't think that the folks at the senior center are going away. And I think that all of us are very, very well aware of the need for the senior center and the fact that this is going to only continue to be a growing need that we're going to continue to hear about. And I really think that the best way to get the best senior center for this town is to break it up so that we know what's going on. I'm very wary of having the folks in town vote on just a number and having the government figure it out. We have a lot of good and talented people that work for your town, but the big decisions, again, are not made by a Board of Selectmen that can wave a magic wand, but the folks at town meeting. And I want to make sure that the senior center that we build is the senior center that you choose. Not the one that I choose, or that my colleagues choose, but the one that the folks in town choose.
Thank you, Mr. Reed.
Chairman, if I could just say, no, I understand you're talking about the Board of Selectmen waving a magic wand. We can put an article to the town meeting floor, and I get it, I understand. The final say of the vote is not only at the town meeting, but you also got to go to the ballot box on the debt exclusion as well. You know, and through you, Mr. Chairman, if I could through you.
I think the manager made it pretty clear. I don't think anyone's mentioned, has anyone mentioned a debt exclusion up here? Okay, I just want to be clear for folks at home that we're not misleading them.
Well, I mean, I'm not putting the words in the manager's mouth, but I know at a prior meeting, he said he would prefer, he would like to see be a debt exclusion. I remember bringing up the same thing about free cash, and I get that. You know, I just, through you, Mr. Chairman, I know Senator Todd's been around a long time, and with all due respect to Robinson, I know he's a freshman state rep. In your history, Senator, in the towns you represent, I'm sure they've built senior centers. And obviously, it would be wonderful, whatever reimbursement we get from the state, but can you actually give a percentage or a dollar amount of an example of the town spending X amount of dollars for a senior center, and what type of reimbursement that you saw? And the representative can comment on that, because he did make comment about the one in Tewksbury, and they still had to go back to the town meeting, because the state didn't come up with the money.
Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through to the members, and Representative Robinson is also going to join me at the microphone here, because we do work as a team, and the legislative delegation as a whole works as a team. And I do want to take the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, just to say that the legislative delegation holds the construction of a new senior center with the same level of priority that this Board of Selectmen does. And we will do whatever it takes, according to the dictates of the town, through its representative government, to achieve the goal that everyone agrees to. It's very difficult, Mr. McCoy, to give you a precise answer to that. There are a lot of variables here, and unfortunately, there are not a lot of state programs targeted directly at the construction of senior centers. I do want to say that Representative Robertson and I, and we will include Representative Gordon in this conversation, are actually exploring some ways by which the town might finance the senior center that could be more advantageous than maybe some conventional means of financing. So as we explore those things, I really can't give you a specific number and a specific percentage. But I will say this, because I think it's germane to the discussion that you're having right now. When we talk about feasibility studies, we're talking about order of magnitude of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Those are things that oftentimes the legislative delegation has the ability to contribute toward in any given budget cycle, because they're of the order of magnitude of operating dollars. When we talk about helping to assist with the construction of a facility, we're talking millions of dollars, and most likely the avenue that we would use to try to achieve that would be to insert an authorization in a bond bill. If we were to do that, that would be a multi-year process, because we have to put something into a bond bill, and then we have to work with the administration to actually release the funding that we've authorized and borrow and commit the proceeds of a borrowing to a project like this. So we're talking about a multi-year kind of a process, and a very arduous process, and one in which there's no guarantee of success with regard to larger capital dollars as opposed to operating dollars. Now, obviously, if the town chooses to move forward, we're going to do whatever we can to be supportive. But I would say that in the near term, we are already beginning to look at options to be able to assist with the cost of a feasibility study. After that, it's going to be a joint effort between all of us, frankly, every one of us, to be able to identify the resources to try to get to some level of assistance, and we do want to do that.
So, Senator, if I may ask you a question, and thank you for being here, to both of you. In your best judgment, would it be wise for the town to move forward with a feasibility study?
Well, that's certainly a loaded question, Mr. Chairman, but I would say this. I have some concerns about not moving forward with a feasibility study, so let me phrase it in the negative. Sure. It is difficult for the legislative delegation to go to Beacon Hill and advocate for something with a lot of variables without answers, number one. Number two, one of the concerns that I have, and I think Selectman Eaton made reference to this, is that we wind up with something that we default into by virtue of having a set number
that then dictates what the building looks like. And I was talking with Representative Robertson about another community that did that with a public safety building that's been going through a lot of difficulty because they set a number in stone. The bids came in and they couldn't meet that number. So what winds up happening? Well, one of two things. You either have to go back to town meeting and ask the taxpayers of the town for additional resources, or you have to reduce the size of the building, making it suboptimum compared to what you actually want. So I am a little bit concerned about not doing a feasibility study and trying to understand all the ramifications of what's before us so that we can decide together. And it may well be that there has to be some of what the architects and others refer to as value engineering. We've been through that before in this community. We won't have the opportunity to do that, I think, without having some more information than we have on the table today. That being said, I just will go out on a bit of a limb here and say that I very much appreciate the spirit of what Selectman O'Mahony was suggesting in terms of making an additional commitment so that it's absolutely clear that the feasibility study will trigger a set of definite things happening so that there will be no, there'll be no question about the commitment of the board to moving forward. With respect, however, still to the fact that this ultimately will likely be a decision that will be made at town meeting and potentially the ballot box.
Thank you. Appreciate the minority leader's input. Representative, did you want to add to that?
No, I just wanted to say the project that we referred and talked about before, and sorry to beat a dead horse for those who have been present for when I talked about this before, coming from the other side of the district, from the Tewksbury side, from your football rivals, we underwent the construction of our senior center in 2004, 2005, 6, and 7. And there was the fall through of an $80,000 pass-through grant from the federal government. And this was done via a community development block grant, which allows towns to utilize and tap into things like certain road repairs, but underneath it are public service facilities. Wilmington is right on the cusp of we may or may not qualify. And for the last several weeks, I've been trying to get in touch with folks in the Housing and Urban Development Department, and I have been in touch with folks at DHCD, which is our state version of it, that works with us for community and economic development and planning, to determine based off of some of the more recent surveys of Wilmington's affluence and demographic background, we would qualify for it. It has some pretty strict requirements in there. 51% of us need to follow what's into low or median income for the state. So, the reason I didn't bring this up before is because they're ultra competitive. And first, I didn't even want to put in a false hope for it. So that is what Tewksbury leveraged before. Taylor woe at the time was that then Governor Romney cut some of this, and Tewksbury's left about $800,000 short. My predecessor, the late Rep. Maselli, went forward, rescued $400,000 of it. That was also 9C cut by the governor, which is a mid-year action, which the governor can, facing fiscal calamity within the state budget, go and claw money back. So that's the reason why when we go up there and we want to say there's some sort of issue that arose, and the state says, Bruce, Dave, Ken, what issue arose? We can say, well, this is what happened. We currently have enough coverage for 14,000 feet. We need 16,000. We need another 15 handicapped, accessible, friendly spots. And this is where we fall short. And it gives us that battle plan going forward. So I only come with that tale of woe not to scare you, but just I think planning help us place an insurance policy, a levy against us having to go back to town meeting, like what happened in Tewksbury, and having another controversial vote, which is also what happened in Tewksbury. And it turned a lot of friends and neighbors against each other. And I think Wilmington's a great town. And I think all three of our priorities are accomplishable. And we can do it in a way that I think we can get the senior center done pretty darn quick, to be honest with you, within the next year or two.
So, Representative, I'll offer you the same question. Do you
Please.
think, in your best judgment, do you think it's wise that the town move forward with a feasibility study?
I think the feasibility study is the correct way to go for the fiscal responsibility and also just any unimaginable trip-ups that might be on the way. And that's just my one opinion.
Appreciate your testimony, both of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative, Leader, thank you. So we have a motion and a second. We do have an offering from Mrs. O'Mahony to include that we are updated, that you mentioned the Elderly Services Commission, the Board of Selectmen, and the community at large, if I may include.
Yes. Well, since the Elder Services Commission is a public meeting and the Board of Selectmen is a public meeting, the hope and expectation would be that those would be presented, the updates would be presented at those meetings, so that, you know, would be passed through to the public in that manner. But I would ask, I would want to make sure that's included, because I know that's a fear, that there's going to be this feasibility study that's kind of done out there in the ethers, and we're not going to get reports. I think it's important for us to know we're going to get regular updates as to where the progress of it and the completion of it.
Mr. Kyra, are you willing to amend your motion?
Yes.
Thank you. Still seconded?
I do.
Okay. Further discussion on that from anybody? Seeing none. All in favor of the motion, which has been amended by Mrs. O'Mahony, signify by raising your hand. All opposed? The motion passes 4-1. So that will ensure that there will be an article at this upcoming town meeting for folks to vote on a feasibility study for the construction of a new senior center. Thank you. We have next public comments. Sir.
Kevin McDonald, the resident.
Your address, sir?
140 Andover Street.
Thank you.
I just want to say that I'm very impressed with our seniors. The past meeting that I was at, some of these folks just offered tremendous insight and passion for what they need and what they want. And I just want to congratulate them for the common unity that they showed. I'd like to offer some of my perspective on some of the town needs. But before I do that, I sent an email to each and every one of you up there, and I just want to confirm with you, or if you confirm with me, that you received an email from me relative to some problems up on Andover Street in Treasure Hill.
I have received, I believe, 5 emails from you regarding this issue.
Did everybody receive emails?
I received 7 emails from you, Mr.
Okay,
McDonald.
all right.
Yes,
Let me just begin by saying this. Earlier in the meeting, it was stated that we need a fire substation. And we're talking like we're going to get that down the road. But I just want to let you know that if you feel that we have a great need for a fire substation, we could actually implement a substation immediately. And all it would take would be to open up one garage bay at the DPW building and put an emergency response vehicle there. And that would address that need immediately without having to build a building, without having to go through a feasibility study, and without having to build a country club-like public safety building. So that's one thing I wanted to offer. With regard to the senior center, my personal opinion is we have an unbelievably tremendous need for elderly housing. When I hear that folks have to wait 3 or 4 years to get into Deming Way, and that's probably wishful thinking. It's probably double that. I would like to see a combination of elderly housing, a senior center, and a mixed-use facility that would fund the entire place. I think 2 places come to mind, and that would be the St. Dorothy site, where we could have commercial on the first floor and possibly providing jobs for some of these folks. We could have elderly housing there, and we could have a senior center. With regard to a feasibility study, we have 351 cities and towns in our state. I'm impressed by Mr. Eaton when he offered the insight of suggesting that we reach out to other communities and see what worked and what didn't work for them. I'd also like to have our senior senior services director offer some type of itemized list of specific needs that she feels as though is needed in a senior center. Mrs. O'Mahony offered a desire to see swimming placed with a recreation facility. It would be really actually nice if we could have a combination where the seniors could go watch a hockey game, go to a pool, go down and get their hair done, or go to get dry cleaning, have senior housing for the seniors that don't drive. And I would like to have our selectmen reach out to the community for some community input, maybe on our website regarding that. The other thing I'd like to offer is that there's been some talk about a town hall, and there's been some talk about placing it where the Swain School site was. And my personal opinion is that's not the best place for it, because when there's a football game, when there's all kinds of activities, that there's not enough parking there. There's not enough parking there if there was a town hall built. We use the town hall for voting, and there's really insufficient parking there for it. The other thing that I'd like to suggest is the Deming Way site. If we could somehow obtain state and federal funds and redevelop the Deming Way site, or have the state redevelop it in such a way where this is just an alternative place to put a senior center. Put a senior center there, and those really inadequate housing units put somewhere else, and put the senior center there, or maybe build some more units around the senior center there. That might be something to explore. The last thing that I want to mention before I get into my initial question is we have a building in town that for years has housed tremendously toxic chemicals that are actually now banned. And they've saturated the building, they've saturated the ground there, from what I understand and from what I hear from town workers. And that's the building beside the Congregational Church. And I realize that we have town workers going in there, and to risk the health of town workers breathing those fumes or having to deal with that, I think is wrong. And I actually think that there should be some effort made to cleaning that building up and knocking it down, taking a look at what that property can be used for if we can address some of our needs concerning that. So lastly, and I'll let the other folks speak.
Thank you.
I sent you all an email regarding what I think is a violation of the bylaw and malfeasance in bringing the person into compliance with the bylaw. In addition to that, when somebody takes material off somebody's easement and they render their water line susceptible to freezing, I think that's wrong. And I think that when the feedback that I get from the board is, you need to go get an attorney. I'll tell you this right now. If I brought my excavator down to the easement where the railroad...
Mr. McDonald, excuse me, I'm going to interrupt you, because I believe that the town manager has spent a lot of time with you in the last couple of weeks discussing this private matter over a private piece of property, which the town is not involved in.
Town's involved in it.
And I think that the manager has spent enough time during his very busy budget season. You can see all the important issues we have here to discuss. He has been very generous with his time over the last couple of weeks discussing this private matter regarding a private piece of property, which we can't have much say in. So,
okay, well,
is there any final question? I want to give the other people an opportunity to speak.
I did meet with the manager in the hallway, and his response to me was, I thought you were against government, so if you're against government, why are you coming to government to ask for your help? Well, simply, when somebody is, when there's concrete bounds of a road, in a road layout, and somebody has an excavator on there digging up soil in the middle of the wintertime when there's no grass that's going to be planted, and they leave dirt so it can erode and clog up drains, I think that's a town issue. When I call and I ask the police department, please send an officer down there to get the insurance information so that a claim can get put in, and I get the police report, and there's absolutely nothing, I feel as though maybe we have Sergeant Schultz from Hogan's Heroes working for us, who
Okay.
sees nothing and
Mr.
knows
McDonald,
nothing.
I'm going to
That's
ask
what all I
that
have
you
to
sit
say.
down so we can
Thank you.
give others an opportunity. Thank you. Ma'am?
Suzanne Clarkin, Reno Road, forgive my speech. I have one comment and one question. I find it somewhat, Mr. Chairman, I'll direct this to you.
Sure.
I find it somewhat discourteous and disheartening to criticize somebody who's not here to defend themselves. I speak specifically of Mrs. Allen, who did nothing but attempt to help the seniors with this particular subject, whether you agree with their conclusions or not. Okay.
If I could respond?
Yep.
Yeah, I recall that there was plenty of praise, and Mr. McCoy praised Miss Allen. I didn't mention her name this evening, and I know that others had praised her. I think we can all agree that she's given a great deal to this community, not just on this issue, but for years, given her time, Permanent Building Committee, and such other committees, that we're really appreciative of that. I don't think that anything up here that was said tonight was meant as a personal attack to her. I actually consider Miss Allen a friend. I think she's a great person, so.
Oh, you forgive me, but that's not the way I heard it.
Okay.
Okay. Am I hearing this right? Are you prioritizing the senior center over the new town hall?
I think we've indicated that by placing an article on the town meeting warrant so that the citizens can
Yeah,
decide.
but you're placing one on for town hall as well.
That's going to be placed into the budget. The Mr. Manager proposed a memo earlier in the evening for $955,000 be put into the budget, taken out of free cash for the feasibility study of a town hall going forward.
And just to be clear, so the proposal that I would be making would be to include a warrant article, as these types of expenditures are typically put forward in the form of a warrant article at town meeting. In terms of prioritizing one over the other, I'm simply suggesting that both need to be addressed in the shorter term here. So it's clear to me that there needs to be a new senior center, and the first step in that process is to identify the location and develop a scope and scale for that project. I think a similar effort needs to be put forward for a town school admin building.
And just to add to that, I'm really proud of the work that this board has done over the last couple of weeks. We've made a lot of headway in terms of major projects such as the senior center, which is a priority. We've also put in a statement of interest for a school, which is a long-term solution that doesn't cost any money. So we're making a lot of headway in a number of different projects, and we're trying to do it as fiscally responsibly as we can,
Okay.
without prioritizing one over the other.
My last comment, and that is that the figures for the senior center were not pulled out of the sky. They were based on what Newburyport spent on their senior center. And I dare say without Mrs. Allen, we wouldn't be where we are today. Thank you, gentlemen.
I agree. Thank you for your
And
comments.
Mrs. Mahoney.
Thank you.
Hi, evening, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
MJ Burns, Wilmington School Committee Board Member, 9 Pinewood Road. I hope you give me a little leeway. I wasn't expecting to speak this evening, but comes to a surprise with regards to the memorandum regarding the feasibility study that you're proposing for the town school building administration. My concern around that is that I know our board and the superintendent of schools wasn't aware of the suggestion that you'd be making this evening, which certainly up to your discretion, but seeing that this is a collaboration in the future, I would just had anticipated that discussion would at least be brought to the school district so that we are at least aware that you're undertaking that discussion.
Could I respond to that?
Please.
I did notify the chairman, your chair, Ms. Bryson,
This morning?
today, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, it's been on the agenda for a week, yes?
Since Thursday afternoon.
Thursday afternoon, thank you. Thank you for the short notice, and I don't mean to be, please don't misconstrue
I don't mean it that
There's
way.
no tone, it's not, please don't take it
It's
the
not
wrong
taken
way.
that way.
I will have to say that in light of the forecast, fiscal forecast that is expected to hit us at some point, I know as a resident and as a board member, I would not be voting for $155,000 free cash feasibility study for an administration building or town hall. Yes, I understand a lot of the buildings that we all are housed in are over 50, 60 years old. We currently have a school falling apart around some of our most vulnerable residents. And these are 3 to 5-year-olds. And when I mean falling, I mean that in the most factual sense without any dramatics. That is a priority. When we are charged by the Department of Education and this great nation to educate our students to the best of our abilities, can't do so when they don't have heat. And granted, I got to tell you, the Superintendent Hooper has been awesome with putting Band-Aids and fixing that. We have a special education department that I wish each and every one of you would at least go and visit and see exactly what we've been discussing. There's no sort of FERPA, which we are obligated under law to uphold. There's no privacy in talking about student cases and sensitive student cases and legal student cases. They actually have to probably leave the building in order to take private calls of those matters. That school is in great disrepair, and I'm very hopeful that this SBA funding will come through, but in the light that it hasn't, that still needs to be addressed, and that is a grave priority. Definitely not taking away from the senior center. I absolutely and unequivocally support the funding to get that rolling, and especially the funding for the feasibility study. I totally understand it. But I'm going to tell you right now, and our administrators in the central office would work in a tent before they would see kids of our communities struggle in a school of that sort, and staff. It's a health hazard, and I have to say, I know that you have to do a balancing act when you talk about the towns and where the needs are, but I hope that you take that in consideration, because I do think between the Wildwood School and the senior center, I think those should be the priorities, and I think if the MSBA funding does not come through, then I think that money would be better served, but if it does, then I think it would certainly be reasonable to think that a feasibility study for 2021, 2022 would be better acclimated in that budget until we see how the school district does with the MSBA. And deferring it for 1 year, I don't think is going to impact it. I wouldn't loop the senior center in that. I would just loop the town hall and the school administration building. So I would very much like to see this board be a little more creative and just fiscally careful with regards to where our school district is currently in applying for the MSBA funding and going forward with those projects of our schools. And I thank you very much for your time and appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, if I could just reply, Ms.
Please
Burns.
do.
Yes, I think it was 2 meetings ago, really pleased to partner with your committee to submit the statement of interest for all the schools, but I think we all have the Wildwood in mind. I would totally agree with you that the fact that we have our youngest children being asked to wear jackets to school when it's cold because there's no heat on certain days is unacceptable. The fact that we have a steam pipe that has burst on parent-teacher night, therefore causing some flooding in a classroom that has to be moved to the library is unacceptable. So I share your concerns about that project. I think it is of the utmost priority, as are some of these other projects, and that's why we're committed to making sure that we can try to secure that funding going forward so that we can provide the best.
Forgive me for interrupting.
No,
Chair.
no problem.
I did not want to minimize that. It's not my intent to minimize that. I'm not saying to eradicate it. I'm just saying that I think it's a balancing act until we hear the response. And I don't think 1 year, I don't think the town is going to be as impacted waiting 1 year for funding for a feasibility study for a town hall and school administration building. I don't think it's a huge impact. Compared to, and I think it would just be, it's just a safeguard is what I offer. And I offer that the board for consideration in that piece.
In regards to your opinion on the town hall, I share that opinion. I don't think that the town hall is the #1 priority in my personal opinion. But the fact of the matter is, I think it's a good move by the manager to propose this because whether we like it or not, this property is a huge piece to our larger puzzle going forward. There very well may be a senior center on this property in a few years. There very well may be something else on this property to free up this space. And I think that we may have to explore that, and that's the reason why I think the manager proposed it.
I don't doubt it, and I'm not, do you understand my intent is not to attack the decision? It's, I think that it can be deferred, I think it may be wise to be deferred a year with regards to the current state with the senior center, which I think is definitely a move forward, but especially with the schools. And I think our meeting that actually it was a selectman meeting that you invited our school board, you invited the finance committee, and you invited Superintendent Hooper, who was a part of the facilities master. I think he was chair. I think that showed in light with regards to granted, we'd like to, in talking about Wildwood, we know that as it relates to the master facilities plan, that requires in itself a more stringent feasibility as we look at our schools in the future. So that in itself, hopefully, will be probably covered under part of it partially under the MSBA, God willing. But we still, that is going to be a long, extensive project as we consolidate our schools, which I hope is still what the Board of Selectmen is in agreement with, along with the school department. But I just say that deferring it 1 year, just for the feasibility study as it pertains to the town hall and school administration building, I don't think would cause any large impact. It's not going to make a huge difference, and I think it could be even possibly a better decision once we know where the school department sits with the state and state funding. And I just offer it as a suggestion, and I just wanted, as a resident as well, to voice my opposition, my concerns towards that.
We certainly appreciate your perspective. Did you want to?
Just a couple of points. I think there's no question that the Wildwood School needs to be addressed. It is a priority. It was identified on the feasibility master plan as the school that was in most distress. I would caution, though, that the suggestion that the building is a health hazard, the statement that was made earlier, because we have had multiple instances where George Hooper, the superintendent of buildings, has had testing done at the request of the school superintendent, and those tests have come back that there is not evidence that there's any air quality issues. Granted, the building does not look particularly appealing. I know that white material that was sprayed on the ceiling back in the 80s in an effort to try to stymie the issue of asbestos, people get concerned about, but to suggest that we are sending kids into a hazardous building is just not accurate.
Point of pure personal preference. Sure. Was not my intent to suggest that, and let me clarify once more for the record, I represent myself here and not that of my board, in my opinions.
Yeah, not taken that way at all.
Thank you very much. What I am saying that and forgive me if I said it's a health hazard, it leads to a significant, when we have mouse feces in the buildings of which are, and let me clarify, is addressed and remedied, but it's ongoing situations, and it's just the age of the building. The pipes, it's not just once a year. There's things constantly happening there. And you know something, and I have to say, and I have to commend the town, especially George Hooper, for coming in and doing a great work just to keep that boat afloat. Mm-hmm. But if any of you have had the opportunity to tour, and it won't take you more than 2 minutes, as to what our special education department currently looks like and the manner in which they are trying to work. You know, it may not be an overall health hazard, and that was not my implication, but work in a small cubicle the size of a desk, you know, without ambient light and having fluorescent, day in, day out for, I don't know, let's say 50 weeks, just give them vacations here and there. That's a strain not only on the efficiency and the effectiveness of that department, but on the overall health of our, and maybe, and when I say that, I say mental health, those are potentials. Those are potentials. I'm not saying, and I certainly would never want to be misconstrued as saying that this town doesn't have everyone working for it in its most, you know, in the best light. But go into that school and look at that department. I'll be more than happy, I'm sure Dr. Brand will be happy to give you a tour of it. But I'm saying, see it for yourselves, to see what the environment that, I don't know what we have, we're growing so much, what we're using for a very confined space.
I think we're in total agreement. In my most recent tour of the school, I mean, I was appalled to see that, or surprised, appalled, whatever you want to call it, that our nurse's office is housed in a men's bathroom. So I would encourage those who haven't seen the building to take the tour also. Mr. Kyra, did you want to mention?
Yeah, I agree with your assessment. The Wildwood School needs to go, without doubt. But I don't necessarily agree with deferring the feasibility study for the town hall for a year. And my thought on it is that this becomes an important piece of that puzzle, in the sense where I would like to see the feasibility study move forward for this town meeting. And this way here, if we can build a town hall and then the senior center, this becomes a place where the children over at the Wildwood could be placed in the interim while a new Wildwood is built. Because you know better than anybody, the MSBA takes 5 to 7 years for its funding, as it did for the high school. So this becomes a critical building in the future, the way I see it. So to defer a whole year to look at a town hall may be hurting the opportunity to get the kids out of there quickly, get them here, housed safely. I mean, they're housed safely at the Wildwood, don't get me wrong with my comments, but to get them here, and we can begin the construction of a new Wildwood. That's why I wouldn't defer it for a year. Just a thought.
I think it comes down to agree to disagree respectfully. I think there's other possible solutions we can investigate. I think that if we start the construction, God willing, with the MSBA assistance, I think we can actually move, have the seniors, once that school is built, move the senior center into the Boutwell for a time being. Our special education department can go at the Buzzell Senior Center, but thus putting our school administration in closer proximity until the town hall. I just don't see, I wouldn't, and forgive me, and it's just maybe the perspective that I look at it in my seat, I wouldn't, and I'm not, and again, don't misconstrue my intent behind my words, but I think the kids of our community, I just want to make sure that there's no, and I know the town will do its best not to make sure that the schools get what they need in a timely fashion, but in the case that if MSBA funding doesn't come through, there are certainly a great number of need in this Commonwealth for new schools. I think we need to have a backup plan, and I don't think 1 year is going to really impact a feasibility study for a school administration building. And frankly, until those kids are situated, those students are situated, that's, as you may understand, I guess, with where I sit, are my top priorities. And I think it would be safe to say, not to speak for my superintendent or the central office team, that's where their priorities lie as well, before new offices, which, as we know, the Roman House too, is been bandied and patched up, and I think it's very admirable of them. But I just offer it, as I said, I just offer it as another consideration. And I'm sure there'll be other opportunities to discuss this further with the town, so I'd like to afford at least my other residents to speak of other issues this evening.
Mrs. Burns, we appreciate your commentary, and I think I can speak for all of us up here when we say that we appreciate all the work that your committee, Chairman Breisman and Dr. Brand, do on behalf of our kids in providing all the resources that the teachers need to provide a great quality education. So we appreciate your efforts.
Thank you. We certainly do try. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Suzanne Sullivan, 60 Lawrence Street. Just in the discussion, I'm actually here tonight not for this, but I'm listening to what MJ just had to say, and it made me think, whatever happened to the land on Main Street? Didn't we buy that for a senior center or senior housing? Why are we not using that?
We bought that property for no specific purpose. We wanted to keep it open for any number of things, the intent being to, the expectation was that we would have this feasibility or master plan study to identify what the condition of the buildings were, and it seemed like an appropriate piece of property to have available to us, whether it ultimately gets used for a town hall or senior center or other options. It was, I think, appropriate to have it available.
Okay, I just want to put it out there, so when we're talking about, well, maybe we have to do a town hall and tear this down, and we don't have a place for a senior center, maybe it might be temporarily, so we have that land there, and I haven't really heard that much inserted into the conversation, so I just wanted to bring it up for information purposes. So I'm actually here tonight because I wanted to come about the 40B in North Wilmington, and sometimes it just might be helpful to listen to what the public has to say when you're making decisions. This sounds like a very costly project, and I'm not saying I'm actually against it. I might not be against it if it was done properly. Currently, the site plan that's been shared with everybody, I will tell you that the delineation on that plan, and I warned the board about this when I came in at the last public comments, that the delineation on that plan is exactly the same as the delineation on the plan when there was a project proposed many years ago there. And the Headwater Stream team appealed that project, and the town denied that project based on the mean annual high water mark of Lover's Brook. The town, the Conservation Commission, denied the delineation that's on this site plan. And we actually appealed it and worked with the Conservation Commission and the developer's attorney to come up with a different delineation, and that's in the agreement that should be on file at the town hall. And that delineation for mean annual high water is over where you can see the water today. All you have to do is drive down to Lover's Brook, where Dr. Wallen's old office used to be, and you can see where the water is today. That's the mean annual high line, and you have to count 200 feet off of that line. That's where it starts. They don't even come close to starting it there. So the majority of that project is in 200 feet of riverfront area of Lover's Brook. So you can do your sewer lines, and you can waste your time and all the money and go through the process, but that's going to be appealed. If they come forward with that delineation, we will appeal the Conservation Commission's decision if the Conservation Commission goes with that line, because we already know, we already have a signed agreement that we adjudicated with DEP that that line's not correct, that they presented in this plan. So sometimes it might help to actually listen to what the public has to say, because I can see the potential of that project almost like with the high school, for instance, because there were problems with the delineations at the high school and the way that the project went forward for the football field. And nobody really wanted to listen to the citizens, and it went forward, and we had to appeal it. It delayed the project twice. And it cost the town money because nobody really wanted to listen to the citizens. So I'm standing up here today to tell you, you might want to think about looking at that delineation before you keep going forward, because it may end up costing people money and time. Because we will appeal that because it's not correct. And you can say, I know they're going to go to the Conservation Commission. I understand that. Typically, when you design a project like this, you go out and you get an ANRAD, an area of resource delineation, so that you know where your buildings go. Because you're wasting everybody's time if you don't do that first. So to bring a project forward like this without a resource area delineation and have the developer sit up there and say that they've done that work already is not true. They have not delineated the resource areas correctly.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can I reply to that?
Go right
Thank
ahead,
you.
no problem.
So I just want to be clear about what we did here tonight. What we did here as a board is we've heard, and I've been here a short time like some others, but we've heard time and time again the need for affordable housing in this community. Here we gave the opportunity for a proposal to move forward through a very public regulatory process. You were correct. It will have to go to the Conservation Committee. If it doesn't meet their standards, the project will end. It has to go to the Board of Appeals. Those people will thoroughly vet it in a public process, and if it doesn't meet their standards, it could fail. If it doesn't meet the governor's standards, they won't grant us the MassWorks grant for the sewer line. It could fail there. All the while, it'll be a very public process. This board tonight voted with a 4-to-1 vote to pass it through, to give it the opportunity to have some affordable housing at that property, because at this point in time, this juncture in time, we're faced with a decision. If we don't do this, then perhaps there could be a much larger project on that site. So,
I guess I don't think that there will be. I think that you'll be lucky to get 70 units in there based on the actual restrictions that you have on the resource protection areas. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I don't think you'll get your 108 units in there because we will appeal it, because you have to adhere to the Wetlands Protection Act. So you're not going to get those units. So what I'm trying to explain and what I'm trying to say is that you could potentially just be wasting everybody's time in doing this, and especially if you're going to go for the sewer project. And on the sewer project, another thing that was misstated by the applicant, and this is really important, and I know I'm probably frustrating you, but it's important to me because a lot of people don't look at these issues, but these are important matters to me. The sewer line, he talked about, you know, a lot of people on that line hooking up from going down Middlesex Ave, a half a mile, I think it was, or something like that. According to our sewer plan, and I sat on that committee, we identified North Wilmington as the needs area, but all the places in between, those are not need areas. The same way when the sewer line came down Middlesex Ave to go to the high school in that area was considered a needs area, so the town could sewer their municipal buildings. Everything in between is not a needs area. So when you start adding those areas in, you're increasing the amount of water that's going to go out of the basin and into basin transfer. And that's a real serious concern for me, because that is not what the plan calls for. The plan does not call for everything else in between to get connected, because now you're changing the whole dynamic of the plan. And he misstated when he said that. I would have liked to have been able to address that, because that's a big issue. So you're bringing this project forward, and what I'm trying to say is there's some issues there that I think should have been ironed out before you voted on it, just so that you know, because you could potentially be wasting everybody's time.
Well, I would respectfully disagree with the fact that we're wasting people's time. I mean, the board has spent months now in the manager's office talking to Mr. Shaman about a proposal which we put forward based on the fact from the community's input, which we've heard time and time again, listening to the residents that they want affordable housing. And so that was not just wasting anybody's time, that was the wishes of the residents. And you're correct about some of the environmental concerns. I'm not an environmental expert. We're going to leave that to our Conservation Committee to make that decision. And I would encourage you to bring up those concerns to them. I know you will. I don't doubt it.
I absolutely will. And I guess my concern is when everybody's reviewing this at one time, and you have, they're in front of the Board of Appeals, more of the town's working on the sewer line, whatever the case may be, and it could end up being an appeal that might kill this project. So if you seriously really do want this project to go forward, I would think that you would have wanted to address these issues up front instead of doing it this way. And I guess that's what I'm saying. When I came here and when the project was before, I tried to tell the town, I told you guys that we had this settlement and that we would be looking to maintain that line in that settlement. But when I look at this site plan, and this plan that's been developed is not based on that line. And that's why I came here, because I wanted to give you guys a heads up. And when I look at this plan, they didn't go by that line. So that means that we're going to have to appeal that permit if the Concom approves it. Or the Concom might just deny it. I don't know. Maybe they will. I don't know. I have no idea what they're going to do. But it just would have been nice to be able to have that conversation up front, is what I'm trying to say. Nobody's here to cause trouble. I just think that it's important to hear what the residents have to say sometimes. I do have a lot of information sometimes that can be helpful. I think this would have been helpful information. That's all I wanted to say, Mr. Chairman. Yep, go ahead.
I appreciate your comments, certainly. If I could just reply by saying that once again, I don't think we're wasting the people's time when we're up against a very looming deadline of the census coming in which we will fall below 10%. We were at a decision where if we act now, we have a chance. If we don't, perhaps we're in trouble and we have a much larger development, if not more than one large development. Mm-hmm. We'll see what the process plays out. It'll be very public. It will go through the proper channels. It won't be me deciding.
Right.
And certainly, I look forward to your input being contributed to. I think you have some valuable input. No question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I hope that we don't have to be the bad guys and appeal this project and potentially stop it, because I know people want affordable housing, but the resource areas are actually more important than the affordable housing, because those are there for future generations, and there's laws that govern and protect those resource areas, and that trumps affordable housing, in my opinion. And that's what I'm concerned with, that's you're not going to get it. We're going to have to play the bad guys and appeal that permit. That's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. Sir.
Hi, Ken Clarkin, 39 Reno Road. Just some comments and questions about the process. It appears to me that we now have 2 feasibility studies going forward, one for the Town Hall School Administration and another one for the Senior Center. I'm wondering, and the process doesn't seem to be clear to me. I guess the first part is hiring an OPM. That's probably going to take, an RFP. It's going to take some going out and getting different people to bid on that. Then having a selection, and by the time the OPM is hired, then you got to go through that exact same process again to get the architect. Is that true?
The process, if town meeting approves one or both of these projects, then we would first go through a request for qualifications to identify an owner's project manager. That, as you state, is the first step. I would expect that process to take somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 weeks. Then once the OPM is on board, we would go through a separate process to hire an architect. Again, a similar timeline. So I think we can do that work in a way so that the OPM is lined up and ready to go at the beginning of July, which is when the funds would be available for use, and then short time after that for the architect.
Mr. Clark, and if I may, let Mr. Eden chime in?
Yeah, I just want to flesh out a point that I hope provides some measure of clarity. If right now, and I'll limit my comments to the senior center, we've agreed that we will put on the warrant for town meeting the feasibility study and schematic design for a senior center. The discussion was, are we going to do that, or are we going to have an article that covers the entire construction of a senior center? If we were to go down the route of paying for the entire construction of a senior center, the first steps would be the same as the schematic design and the feasibility study, correct?
That's right.
So really, if it's path 1, which is just due in 2020, the feasibility study and the schematic design, or doing everything at once, the steps for the first path are the steps for the second path too, which is we don't know where that path is going to lead us.
Once you've done the first pass, then you have to wait for town meeting. Otherwise, you'd keep going forward.
With the exception of some of the comments that my colleague said, where if the process of the feasibility study and the schematic design ended early, we could certainly call a special town meeting to get it to happen. So it's not necessarily waiting until May 2021. If it ends in September 2020, which I think would be probably unreasonably optimistic, that process would be done that quickly. I don't think anyone in town is going to let us wait that long, wait 6 months or more to go to wait for another annual town meeting to go forward to build a new senior center.
No, I'm actually thinking the opposite. I'm thinking that the amount of time to get the OPM on board is not going to be 4 to 6 weeks. It's going to be like 4 months. And then a similar time frame for the architect. And then the study has to be performed, and that's going to take about a half a year or more. I'm saying that I don't think any of it's going to be ready for 2021. I don't see how this, especially if the OPM that you hire is doing both projects. Then
I don't think it's not likely that we would have the one OPM doing both projects. I think they'd probably be 2 separate. But and certainly to your point about the school town admin building, it is not likely that work would be complete for a 2021 request for construction funds. I think that project is going to take longer to get to the point of schematic design. I do think it's possible on the senior center side, for the OPM and the architect to be in place and for the work that they need to do to be completed in time for the annual town meeting of 2021. And, to the extent, and I think it's probably unlikely, but to the extent that the timeline is shorter than that, then certainly there would be the possibility of a special town meeting. But again, I think it's more likely that it would be annual town meeting of 2021 for the appropriation for construction of a senior center.
Okay. I think it's probably going to be 2022 for both, because I think neither project is going to get, I'm really surprised that either project would be done by the 2021 town meeting. That said, the other question is...
Mr. Clark, and if I could
Yeah.
just interrupt you while you're
Yeah.
bringing up that next thought, I agree with you. Okay, and I don't know when it's going to be, because I'm certainly not an expert on that. I think
Yep.
that's why we want to hire these experts to kind of give us a better indication.
Yeah, and I want them to do a good job. It doesn't, I was a little surprised when Ms. O'Mahony said 2021. That just seemed to be too short a cycle to get all that work done. So I think what we're talking about is the project going out to 2022, construction not getting into a couple of years after that, which means the 8.75 million that was talked about earlier is going to go up by like 2 or 3 million just from construction cost indexes. So we're going to wind up seeing a lot more funds required to build either project.
I first wanted to say, the feasibility study for the town hall wasn't something that was up for us to discuss tonight. And I have a lot of the same concerns that have been expressed by other people. So I don't necessarily, I'm not sitting here saying that I would even support that feasibility study being funded in the next fiscal cycle. I think we need more information on some of our other projects before it makes sense to evaluate where a town hall would go. I.e., if we're going to merge 6 schools into 3, we have 3 sites that would then become available for a potential town hall. And I would want that to occur before we're trying to figure that out. I don't understand, I guess where I'm trying to wrap my head around is all of the planning that we just voted to put into the warrant article, we voted to put into the article for the 2020 town meeting. It's planning that's going to need to happen, whether you are guaranteed the $8.75 million at that town meeting or just the guarantee of the feasibility study going forward. That time frame doesn't change. All it does is
The work doesn't change.
the work doesn't change, but I don't understand how the time frame. If we still need to get an OP, we would still need to get a feasibility study done. We would still need to get planning done. We would still need to get an architect. We would still need to follow the guidelines to put these requests for bids out there. We can't. There is no magic wand to wave and build the senior center tomorrow. And so my concern is we're going to pigeonhole ourselves into an amount that may be dead on or may be completely inaccurate. And the reason I say that is because I don't have the information I need as a citizen to vote on it to know whether $8.75 million makes sense. And that's where I was coming from earlier. And I understand the concern that you don't want the delays, which is why I suggested we have these regular updates. Because if we're getting monthly updates saying that there's still no project manager, that's a concern. And that's a concern that someone would need to answer for. My expectation would be someone would have to explain to us why it takes 4 months to get a project manager.
I didn't stand for that. What I came up for was to try and get an idea of what that real timeline was. I was surprised that this was going to, that there was even a possibility of this being done by 2021.
I referenced 2021 because that's what the town manager had put in his memo to us, that the expectation would be the feasibility study would hopefully be completed so that the funding for the project could be on the 2021 annual town meeting component. That's why I referenced it. My hope would be we're going to get the plans as soon as possible. That's what I'd like to see, but I want to make sure that they're thoughtful plans with the right people giving input into them.
Okay. Then,
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I had one clarifying question for Mr. Hall. I'm not well-versed in the process of putting together an RFP, but we could actually put in it that the final result would be due in advance of the town meeting, correct?
Yes, I mean, the one caveat I guess I would suggest that perhaps could cause delays is to the extent that when the feasibility study is in process, and clearly that's going to be a public process because there'll have to be discussions and there'll certainly be input from many residents and boards and so on about the sites and where the preferred site is for the senior center. If there's considerable back and forth and the town is not able amongst itself, its boards and residents, to come to a conclusion as to which site is the preferred site, that could create a problem because obviously the architect can't get to work on focusing on a particular site until he has a particular site. So, you know, presuming that that we can get to a consensus around where the senior center should go and do that in a relatively timely manner, then I think the rest of the work can be done in time for a 2021.
2021 requires a consensus.
Yeah, I mean, clearly needs to be consensus amongst the town residents, Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, and so on, as to where the facility is going to go. That's going to be really one of the first goals of this whole process. Where do we locate the senior center? And then once, you know, there'll be certainly some consideration of multiple sites, but once there can be consensus around where that site is going to be, then the architect can do some more detailed work at looking at that particular site and finding out what the barriers are, the obstacles to construction, whatever they might be.
Yeah.
But there has to be one site.
Okay, so let's say 4 to 6 weeks for the OPM, 4 to 6 weeks for the architect, maybe like 6 to 9 months for the actual study. We're pretty much to a year. How soon can we get something in for 2021 if it does take a year? Do we have to have for a May town meeting, when do we have to have the feasibility study done?
Well, so I will need to have a budget estimate for construction, you know, certainly by January of next year, so that I can work that into the.
By January.
Yeah.
Then another question, if it's going to be funded, both of these are funded by free cash, when is that available? Is that available as soon as the town meeting votes it, or do you have to wait for that free cash to be certified?
Right, so free cash, right now we have free cash certified at just over $24 million. That remains certified until the end of the fiscal year. So as of June 30, 2020, then the free cash essentially goes off the books, so to speak, until the Department of Revenue recertifies it, which is a function of our accounting and finance department putting information together to close out the books for 2020, and that free cash certification in the past has happened anywhere between October and November of a given year.
Okay, so if we have a May town meeting that votes the free cash for both these projects, can we immediately pull free cash, or do we have to wait till November for certification of the funds?
No, because because we have the money on hand at town meeting, those funds can be drawn and would be available. If there was no action taken by town meeting on these articles as of July 1, that free cash goes away, and there would not be the ability to access those funds until free cash is recertified again in October or November.
Okay, so is June 30th or July 1st, is that sufficient time to pull the free cash for both these projects?
If either of these projects is approved at town meeting, yes, we would immediately have access to.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So approve the projects on the town meeting, the money's available, the feasibility study or the hiring process gets
Right,
started.
I mean, just by way of example, at last town meeting, town meeting of 2019, there was an appropriation of $566,000 for replacement of the underground storage tanks at the DPW. We were putting them up above ground. So the approval was granted at the May town meeting. That money was immediately accessed, and the project went forward. So the similar situation would happen here. If the funds were approved in the amount of $650,000 for a feasibility and schematic design for the senior center, those monies would be immediately accessed, and we can't spend the money until after July 1, but essentially those funds would be reserved for that purpose, and we would hire the OPM after July 1 and the designer shortly thereafter.
And the money, and those two figures are still available. They don't shut down.
That's
because
right.
they've already been reserved.
Already been earmarked.
All right. And so from July 1st to January 30th, I'll say, that's the time frame we have to have the feasibility study done?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly, I need to have a budget number for the beginning to the middle of January, essentially right around now, to be able to put into the budget for fiscal 21. That's right.
And so if the project or the study takes 6 months, then we're not going to hit that milestone.
Yeah, if it takes 6 months, then that's going to be a problem. But I think the expectations from talking to the person that we dealt with on the high school project is that we should be able to do that sooner. Again, I can't say for certain, if we can reach some consensus fairly quickly in terms of where that site is going to be, then it's more likely we can. If it turns out that there's a lot of back and forth and uncertainty and we can't reach consensus over where the designated site would be, then it would most likely have to be a special town meeting.
Or, defer to 2022 as possible.
My sense, and I don't certainly want to speak for the board, but if the worst-case scenario happened and the feasibility schematic design could not be done in time to budget for the annual town meeting, my sense is that there would be a desire to have a special town meeting in the fall of 2021.
One final question is, and I've forgotten it. Anyway, huh?
Late.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Clarkin. Sure, Mr. McCoy?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just to piggyback on what Mr. Clarkin said, Jeff, just a question to you. How long did it take how long did the process take to get the facility master's plan consultant hired? And just try to show a little timeline, because obviously if it goes over the 6 months, then the board could wave that magic wand and call a special town meeting. I heard that said about 3 times. So how long did it take that massive facility, timelines? How long did it take to hire that massive facility?
Offhand, I don't recall. I think it was probably, I don't want to guess. I don't know.
Maybe for next time, because if it took more than 6 months, then that's the dilemma that we run into. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ma'am?
Hi, I'm Deborah Russo. I live at 902 Lord's Court. First of all, this really doesn't have anything to do with what I came up to talk about, but I have to laugh at the idea of $2,800 a month being called affordable. That's just absurd. But anyways, the first thing I want to say is I don't know if it was some kind of political acumen or what, but I really feel that it's so disrespectful that you put the senior center last on a very long agenda. We talked a month ago at the last Board of Selectmen's meeting about our, what we wanted, and we were going to be on, going to be on this agenda to talk about it, and there would have been a whole lot more seniors here if it wasn't this late. To put us last on a lousy night, I just think it's disrespectful, and I just wanted to say that. A couple of things, and I'll be quick because people want to go home. I don't get this. Where did this come from, this feasibility study for a town school administration building? Nobody said that the senior center was going to be sited here. To me, that's crazy. One at a time. The senior center, do the senior center. In the facilities master plan, the senior center was called a necessity. Town hall, it's adequate. You don't need a new town hall. We need a senior center. So let's just deal with that. One thing that kind of bothers me is, Mr. Hull, when you had said that you had talked to the people who are responsible for the high school, the professionals. Well, there's problems with the high school. There were problems with the middle school. I guess there's always going to be problems, even if you do it the right way. So to me, give us the money up front. I know your concerns. But that number didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, we did research. We went to a place that said they didn't have any problems. They loved every single part of the process. And we added from there. We were able to get figures that said, okay, every year it goes up by this amount. If you make us go to town meeting for a feasibility study, and then we go to town meeting again for more money, well, at that time, anything could happen. I mean, any project might be, so disastrous we have to deal with it right away. So then what have we done? We have a feasibility study that, depending on how long we have to wait, might not even be worth anything anymore. Give us the money. Let us do the whole thing. When you said, the plan we provide for you or something like that, that kind of bothered me. Because I don't want you to provide a plan. I don't want you to decide the OPM. I think that should be public. I have a problem with asking people who haven't necessarily designed a senior center to speak on the costs or whatever of a senior center. That doesn't seem right to me. We need to talk to people who have designed and built senior centers. And then the last thing I want to say, and I think it was you, and I apologize for pointing or whatever, but you said something about, those people at the senior center will still be there. And I'm here to tell you, some of them won't. And that's why this is so important. We need to start and go until it's done, because some of these people won't be here. I know that this is a senior center for the seniors of the future, but we have a lot of seniors now, and they could really use a new one. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Just a couple quick things there. You mentioned the current senior center. I do want to mention that under new business, I intend to bring up a proposal for a future addenda item for the current senior center. Just want to make mention.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask for a 2-minute break? I thought we were almost done, but if I could step out for a minute.
Very short 1 sentence for me. I can't speak for you.
Is there anybody else?
I'll be right back.
We'll move for a short recess.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Ma'am?
Sorry. Robin Theodos, 73 Clark Street. I only have one thing to say. Thank you for voting, well, two. Thank you for voting for a feasibility study. It's a start. I appreciate that. Also, what I really want to say is I don't think that we would like, many of us would like to have somebody that designed a high school design a senior center. I would rather have somebody that has successfully designed senior centers doing our senior center. I would appreciate it if you could look for somebody that has done some of that work successfully. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
I agree. Thank you. Sir.
Ethan Sawyer, 58 Lawrence Street. So I guess to me, when I looked at the vote tonight regarding the Princeton Properties project. It wasn't, the vote wasn't really about creating affordable housing. It was about preventing an unfriendly 40B. I mean, because just from a very practical standpoint, if this 108 unit building didn't go through, I think you made it very clear to all of us that a much larger unfriendly 40B would probably end up going in there, which would actually result in more affordable housing units. But that's not to say that you made the wrong decision, and I know it was a very difficult decision too. So I don't want to minimize the difficulty of that decision. But to me, it comes down to simple math, because really the decision is about trying to take action to stop the unfriendly 40B. And I don't feel like we really have any clear numbers. I know that it takes time to generate those. We have to wait for the census to come out. But the reality is every new housing unit that goes into this town, I think the town has some ability, since we have to approve the building permits, that pretty much know how many we have. So we should know what that denominator is. Ms. Gingrich just said that they had to very recently sign off on the DHCD new subsidized housing inventory count. I don't think we heard what that count was. We know that I guess there was sort of a surprise as to some of the units dropping off of it, because the people who live there are need to be anonymous, so they can't say where that housing is. So we lost some units that we didn't expect. She gave a number of 3 that we were short of the 10% by 3, but I think that that's based on the 2010 census as the denominator and whatever the number was for the current. But back in, for the current affordable units. But back in 2019, she had kind of put a rough estimate, ballpark number, between 75 and 100 units that we were short. So again, the simple math of it is this. If you add this new 108 unit complex onto our denominator and the numerator, because it's both a total housing unit number, and it is also 100% considered for the affordable housing units. If we're short by 75, then this project solves that problem. If we're short by 100, it doesn't solve the problem. We put in the 108 units, and guess what? We're still below the 10% threshold. And the reality is, every month, for just about the next 2 years, there are affordable units that are dropping off of our list. So every month we lose affordable units because of, I guess, a rehab program that was done 20 or so years ago. So we can't just barely get there, we need more, because if I understood it correctly, what Ms. Gingrich was saying is that once that denominator is established, we have to always be at the 10% for the numerator, so those affordable units. And if at any point we drop below it, we're open to that unfriendly 40B. So that was my primary concern, is that if we're going to do this, let's make sure it solves the problem. I don't know if anyone up there, sitting up there today, has those numbers or our best estimates at this point. But I think that's my primary concern, is that we're approving a project that might not actually solve anything, even if it all goes through. The other concern or question I had is if we don't get the MassWorks grant for the sewer extension, the developer made it very clear that the project wouldn't be profitable if he had to pay for it. Does that mean the project's dead, or is the town going to pay for the sewer extension if we can't get that grant?
The proposal ends if we don't get the grant.
Okay.
Correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that those were really the concerns that I had. So I hope the math works, because I think we're kind of locked into it now.
Thank you for your
Thank
comments.
you.
Mr. West.
Hi, good evening, Frank West, 2 Birchwood Road. I'll try to be brief, but I know it's late. Just a couple of things was that Mr. Bendel, you had asked about had I ever taken a vote on a topic that was mentioned on an agenda that didn't necessarily call for a vote. To be honest with you, I was a selectman from 2002 to 2005. I honestly don't remember. But what I can tell you is that 2 of my colleagues, my former colleagues, both Selectman McCoy and former Selectman Sullivan, are in the room here. And prior to us being on the board, we didn't have such a thing as public comments. Mr. McCoy Selectman McCoy will say that he initiated it through his chairmanship. And, you know, that's right around the time that public comments was allowed. So prior to that, we weren't allowed to speak, okay?
It's not required by law.
What's that?
It's not required by law, right?
Right.
We've always just kind of, as you know, the chair has traditionally, after that time you just mentioned, continued to have it on the agenda. By law, we're required to have the meeting in public, but we're not required to have public comment.
But I believe that either myself or, you know, and again, I won't necessarily speak for my 2 former colleagues, but I believe when we were on that board, if people wanted to speak, I don't think there were too many times that we shut them out. I don't know if, you know, I was only on for Yeah, and a lot of our meetings were way late at night, and again, I apologize for that. But anyhow, that being said, you talked about careful planning. That was a term that Ms. Selectman O'Mahony used. And I'm going to say that, you know, when we're talking about the North Wilmington project, and I know you didn't use it on the North Wilmington project, but you know, one of the things that we should hear is the complete story going on down there, and I don't think anyone has. You know, number one, you voted tonight that potentially, you know, and again, I know it's got a lot of permitting process and yays and nays and all that, but to potentially allow 2 4-story buildings to go up in an area that the Board of Appeals, and there were members here in the audience, refused a project based on the size, the height requirement of that building. And again, it's gone through mediation. You know, it's a detox center. We all know that. But the Board of Appeals refused, based on the height of that building. And here you guys are kind of, you know, potentially granting at least your opinion approval to allow that. You have the Eli family is talking about keeping a commercial piece of property on the site that we don't know what that traffic impact's going to be. We were also talking about the train. You know, you got the platform and potentially parking issues down there. So we don't know what the whole project's going to be. So like I said, I was just a little bit taken back when you didn't allow the public to speak. The other thing also,
if I could,
absolutely,
respectfully,
sure.
I mean, we are here allowing the public to speak. It's my job as a chair, and as you well know, to try to keep the meeting moving fairly steadily, and it's up to debate whether I've done that tonight, but it's 11:15 and we're still having public comment. So I take exception to the fact that you're saying that I didn't let the public speak. We are speaking. And to your very point, which you approached the microphone with, is that public comment didn't always exist in this board. It does now. It always will, as far as my hope is, but there's really nothing that dictates when it has to be. And you can understand when we have quite a few very important topics on the agenda with a large crowd for a number of different reasons, that we want to try to keep the meeting moving at an appropriate pace to be respectful for others. We knew that this senior center item would be quite lengthy, and that's part of the reason that it's the 3rd board to consider item. Board to consider is always traditionally towards the end, but to be respectful of all the other people that have to sit around and wait for those items, it was a matter of respect for everyone else. And so here I am trying to do the very best I can so that everybody can be heard. At 11:15, I take exception to that.
Yeah. No, but again, it's not the fact that you're allowing public comments, it's the timing of public comments. And again, I don't want to belabor the point, but again, my opinion would have been to allow public comments before the vote so that you guys could hear input from people like Ms. Sullivan, as an example, talking about the water and delineations. And one comment that I wanted to make is that, I kind of heard, before I came here tonight, I watched the show Porn Stars, P-A-W-N, Porn Stars. I think we're all familiar with it. I wanted to make sure I spelled it and made sure it was clearly.
Appreciate that.
But anyhow.
You didn't pronounce the way, but that's all right.
But that being said, you see these people going in and saying, yeah, I have this trinket this chair that I want $1,000, but I'll take 400. Just, I don't want anybody to know that up front. And then they meet the auction, the appraisers, and they come in and they say, hey, I want 1,000, 400, 700, 600, and it comes in at 650, and they shake hands on it. These guys here came in with a proposal that really was their first bite at the apple. This was this proposal way up here. And what they did was they bid it down, they bid it down to something that still needs a lot of work, in my eyes. Number one, 4-story buildings. As Selectman McCoy said, can you show me a 4-story residential building in town? I don't think so. As far as the taxes, are they being taxed at residential or commercial? I looked up through MLS. I believe that both of the Avalons, Metro and the Regency Place, are being taxed at residential rates. Quite truthfully, I don't know how many units there are there, but their tax bill is under $300,000 on each unit. You guys can verify that. Maybe you should ask that, because that way there it gives you an idea of what type of an impact. You get $300,000, but you may have 50 students that you're teaching or whatever. But it's just, like I said, I think we could have gotten a better deal up front. I know it's still got a process, but I just wish that, that you guys had really strived to get a better deal. And I'm just a little disappointed that initially we don't.
Well, Mr. West, I agree with you, and I think that we are, by voting for moving this forward to our regulatory process, the committees that it's going to see, we can explore all those things. Those questions can be answered. For us to really sit and think, well, will it be this, will it be that, it's really not under our purview to discuss those items. Let the professionals that do that make those decisions.
The last thing on that, on the affordable housing end, and again, I think probably before this type microphone, I think I've probably spoken the most to this board in the last couple of years.
It's pretty close.
On affordable housing in general. I think what you guys should look at is find out what do Avalon, Metro, Regency Place, what is their affordable housing rate? I think it's higher than 20%.
Right.
It's either 25 or possibly 30. So that's a negotiation standpoint that we could use. So I just wanted to bring those items up.
Yeah, and just, if I may, Mr.
Sure.
With all due respect,
Yeah.
Here's my dilemma as chair. We have to put public comment on the agenda, right? Well, we don't have to, but I prefer to. Traditionally we do. I prefer to continue that tradition newly as chair. It has to go somewhere. So some committees will put it at the beginning of the meeting, right? That could be flawed. You could argue that someone's voice would be heard and we still have to take a vote. Put it at the end, you don't get to hear it till the end. Because of open meeting law, we don't just get to pick and choose when we want to do that. Otherwise, someone at home could say, hey, I would have liked to have spoken on that, but I had to wait till the end. We have to put it somewhere. So I'm in a lose-lose, right? If I put it at the beginning, you don't get to say anything about what happened afterwards. If I put it at the end, people are upset. But at some point, I just have to make a decision as chair. I put it at the end, like we always have.
But just closing, I would just say that I would just recommend that in the future, when you have agenda items that you think would generate public discussion, I think there are opportunities to put those specific items on public discussion, and then at the end you can have public topics to talk about, whatever it is. So that's just my opinion.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments?
Mr. Chair, since we are in public comments, and I do see the Director of Elder Services out there, maybe she could give us an update as to what's happening with the $40,000 that's been appropriated for renovations over at the senior center. I know that there was $10,000 of the budget, another $30,000 that our state legislators appropriated. And I know that I had visited and talked with Ms. Masiello on different items that has been needed in cabinets and countertops, floors, and refrigeration. Yeah,
Yep.
please.
So, hi, I'm Terry.
Good
So I just want to let you know for the floors, currently right now, the rug was pulled up in our arts and crafts room. We were hoping to be an easy sand and polyurethane, but we do have to have a company come in because the glue was just too much. The reason the rug was pulled up, it was kind of a hazard, so we need to pull that up. So that's going to be done on January 29th, Wednesday, January 29th through the 31st, and so that it can cure over the weekend, the last weekend of this month. Then we have worked with the state. There's a program in the state where the prisoners do make furniture. We have a contract with them to be making our cabinets. That has been in the process right now, that they are in the process of making it for us. It will take a couple of months to do because they do them all by hand. So to tell you the actual date as to when that will be done, I'm really sorry, I can't tell you a specific date, but that will probably be done more towards March. Actually, I'm meeting with George Hooper tomorrow morning, tomorrow at 1:30, for us to be able to work on getting the stove. We're in the process of getting the stove because that needs to go on first in order to figure out how the configuration for the countertop. But the layout of the kitchen is all set, and now it's just a matter of getting, like I say, I think March will be the time when the cabinets and things will be starting to form for that. The public buildings did put in a special zoning. There was a problem, not a problem, but the spot heating. And George and his crew came up with tried to solve the issue where there's, instead of, you know how you can make zones for your home? So he made it that there's a certain thermometer, I'm not an electrician but there's a certain thing within the building so it can read the temperature within the hallway and everything, so kind of making the heat within the center more even. So these things are evolving from that. That actually is not from that 30,000, I don't believe. To tell you the truth, I don't know the cost of that right off the hand, or if that was part of just George's budget. But these things are evolving, and again, George and I are meeting tomorrow afternoon.
Okay, great, thank you. I just want to make sure that you're using that to...
Oh, yes, most definitely. In order for us to be able to function on a daily level, we really need to get these things done, and so they are in the process.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Are there any other public comments? Okay, we'll move to announcements. I'll start. I have 3 quick announcements. Number 1, we want to welcome home one of our police officers, Rafael Cruz, is home from deployment safely. So we're very thankful for that he's home and safe, and we appreciate his service. Secondly, the Economic Development Committee. I see my colleague, my dear colleague, Ms. Sullivan, in the room. We want to let everyone know to please fill out the Economic Development Survey that's now available online. We've also provided printed copies at the Senior Center and the library and Town Hall. If you want to give your input on what type of business we should be looking for and how we could attract them, we're looking for some input when it comes to economic development. So please participate in the survey. It's very brief. It'll take you less than 5 minutes. And lastly, under announcements, I want to thank and wish her well. Paula Barry just retired here from Town Hall after many years of service. I wish her and her husband all the best going forward. Any other announcements?
I just wanted to thank the chairman for having the cheerleaders come tonight. I left with the singers last time and the cheerleaders tonight. I think it's a great way to start a meeting, even when the meeting carries over to the next day.
Thank you. I thought the kids were great.
I would love to see that more often.
Thank you.
Just one comment. I just wanted to point out the great work that the fire department did over the last couple of days. Actually, Thursday, Friday, there was a fire down at Industrial Way in a building down there. There were some chemical issues. We had multiple towns responding. Hazmat team was there. Our crew was there. And then shortly thereafter, I think it was the following, within 24 hours, another fire over on Cook Street. Granted, this is what they're paid to do, but still, when the kind of situation in particular with Industrial Way, we appreciate their services.
And it wouldn't be a meeting unless I took a shot at Keolis, so here it is. On that same day, our fire department got stuck behind the train responding to a car accident on Ballardvale and Andover. Fortunately, everybody was okay, but the fire trucks had to wait as the train conductor had the window down on a nice Friday afternoon and waved hello to the fire chief in the trucks with the lights and sirens going. Fortunately, the people are okay. But my offer still stands if Keolis or the MBTA would like to come in and chat with us about that serious problem we have in town. Any other announcements? We'll move to new business. I have one item. If I may begin, I'd like to take up at a future meeting, if it's okay, with my colleagues, understanding that we have a need, great need, at the senior center. We are overwhelmed with so many great people that want to attend the senior center that I believe I'd like to call for immediate expansion of the hours. Currently, we are open 37.5 hours a week, I believe, 7.5 hours a day. I'd like to see that extended into the evenings for some who would like to attend, perhaps even Saturday. I'd like for this board to explore the possibility of the senior center being open more than 7.5 hours a day. The way I'll propose when the time comes is to pay for that is potentially similar to a senior work-off program, is to hire a couple of seniors to work a few hours in the evening or on a Saturday morning so that the senior center could be open for folks who want to attend. Since we have such a growing population, it's evident here this evening, we have some that are willing to stay up late, that I'd like to see that, and I'd like to take that up with this board so that we could have some immediate relief at the senior center going forward. Any other new business? Sir?
Just real quick, Jeff, unless you want to wait till next time, you mentioned Cook Ave. I know at the last meeting, you give us an update relative to Cook Ave. I know Olin made a commitment, what was it, October 2019, that they said they would fund the water line on Cook Ave. What's the status of it? And unfortunately, since we talked last time, there was a house fire on Cook Ave. And obviously, I would imagine they had to probably run the water, probably from Main Street, I would assume, up the Cook Ave, because there's no water.
There is an agreement that is in the process. Dan Deutsch has prepared a draft, and that will be going out to council for Olin within the next couple of weeks to review and respond. So that is a work in progress.
All right, thank you, Mr. Manager. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other items under new business? Seeing none, we'll move to important dates, please.
January 20th, town offices closed. Martin Luther King Day. January 23rd, Wilmington Substance Abuse Coalition, Marijuana, Vape, and You, St. Thomas's Church, 7 p.m. January 27th, the Board of Selectmen's meeting, Town Hall, Room 9, Town Manager's budget presentation. January 28th, Finance Committee, Town Hall, Room 9, 7 p.m. FY21 Budget Overview, Revenue and General Government. January 30th, Finance Committee meeting, Town Hall, Room 9, 7 p.m. Planning and Conservation, Building Inspector, Building Board of Appeals, and Board of Health. February 4th, Finance Committee meeting, Town Hall, Room 9, 7 p.m. Department of Public Works. February 6th, Finance Committee meeting, Town Hall, Room 9, 7 p.m. Veterans Services, Elderly Services. February 7th, last day to submit petition warrant articles for inclusion on the warrant for the annual town meeting, May 2nd, 2020. February 10th, Board of Selectmen's meeting, Room 9, 7 p.m. February 11th, Finance Committee meeting, Room 9, 7 p.m. Public Buildings Department. February 13th, Finance Committee meeting, Town Hall, Room 9, Library, Recreation and Historical Commission. February 24th, Board of Selectmen's meeting, Room 9, 7 p.m. February 25th, Finance Committee meeting, Public Safety Building, 7 p.m. Police, Public Safety, Dispatch, and Fire Department. February 27th, Finance Committee meeting, Town Hall, Room 9, 7 p.m. Town Clerk and Information Technology. March 3rd, Finance Committee meeting, Shawshene Tech, 7 p.m. And March 5th, Finance Committee meeting, Wilmington High School, 7 p.m. at the Wilmington Public Schools.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Seconded. All in favor? It's unanimous. Good night, everyone.